The beginning of the journey, the town of Ebelstein, immersed in the morning haze, seems peaceful and serene. The old liar dwells here, his wrinkled hands sometimes illuminated by the dim light of magic. His power is small, only the magic of the first star, barely enough to pay for daily labor. But a bad character more than compensates for the lack of growth, continuing in every harsh word. He especially couldn't stand children's hats, reacting to them with undisguised irritation. And then, in the midst of the commotion, a boy with white hair looks at him, his gaze full of hidden sadness. The red eyes, so unusual for these parts, reveal him to be more than just a child. Under cover of night, by the flickering fire, conversations full of wisdom and foreboding begin between them. The boy listens attentively, looking at his reflection, deep in thought, perhaps about his destiny. Time flies, changing seasons, and now the branch is covered with frost, foreshadowing new trials. But winter is passing, giving way to spring, which brings with it hope and a renewed sense of strength. Under the watchful eye of the old man, a boy, like a sprout, a beginning assistant, his amazing magic. Blue sparks of mana envelop him, betraying the incredible tension with which he is struggling with himself. The old man, amazed, realizes that the boy is not just casting spells, he is thinking for himself, mana capturing its flows. There is a primal glimmer in his red eyes, a being that surpasses all previous expectations. The synthesis of magic occurs instantly. A stream of energy bursts out of his hands, a ready-made, complex form. The bright light is blinding. The power activated in the young body becomes an unexpected, transformative reality. The old man comes out, amazed by the scale, while there is something around the boy, enveloped in azure light. Mana takes shape, a strange yet familiar tool woven from pure energy. And this instrument, shining with a turquoise light, falls on the target with incredible force, completing the demonstration. Anxiety creeps across his face. The pot runs down his temples, as if he had seen a creature so great and dangerous. The boy, with fiery eyes and a stubborn gaze, barely concealed his triumph, realizing the power that had awakened within him. But as day gives way to night, and darkness descends upon their humble shelter, other conversations begin to take place with you. Over a mug of alcoholic drink, the old man speaks bitterly of the world of the Great Wall of Ebelstein, where aristocrats are born with a gift. He warns the boy about the traps of pride, that a simpleton will never reach such heights, no matter how hard he tries. Magic is blood, he echoes, and without noble blood all efforts are in vain, trying to protect or break the young spirit. Perhaps these words reflected his activities, the unspoken pain of unfulfilled dreams, of everything that was inaccessible to him. That night dragged on unbearably long, filled with dark forebodings and a light liquid under the measured crackling of the fire. Suddenly, the heavens opened and a cold, piercing rain fell upon the earth, drowning out all sound. And by morning, the boy discovered that the chair lay motionless, frozen forever under the streams of rain. His body was disfigured by bruises, as if someone had cruelly ended his life, leaving only an unanswered question. The only witness, a young orphan, took a shovel in his hands and, under cold drops, began to dig a farewell shelter. Every drop falling from the sky measured out the moments of his bitter loss, leaving behind grief and anger. The weight of the loss was no less crushing than the body of the old man he'd been protecting, but with a wrenching effort he had lowered into the damp earth. A simple cross rose above the fresh grave, a silent witness to the end of one life and a new, inevitable beginning of the struggle. Tears mingled with the rain on his face, but behind the pain something else was already maturing, a cold, steely determination. And then, through the veil of grief and rain, the turquoise symbols appeared before him again, promising strength that does not depend on origin. His red eyes flared with a new fire, a challenge of fire directed against the injustice of the world and the written fate. Thus 4 long years passed, and the boy, his heart forged in the crucible of loss, was released into the vastness of a new world, with all its possibilities and dangers. Quote, and somehow all here, in this world she was waiting for him, Katja Flameheart, a name that inspired respect. A noble by birth, she was a 3-star mage whose power was coveted by many mercenary squads. But Katja remains true to her principles, taking contracts through the mercenary squad Beldown in the city of Ebelstein. And it was she who had the honor of teaching young Derek, who had just joined the squad and mastered the magic of the first star. For 4 years he drew on the knowledge of this powerful mentor, infusing every lesson with moisture. He continued his education at the Belden's Tier Tavern, where time flowed calmly and comfortably under the roof. Derek, you are destined to rise. Your talent is undeniable, she said. The desire for power is naturally higher for a magician. But remember, excessive greed will only slow down true progress, holding you back from greatness. Her gaze was stern but full of wisdom. "I will take your words into account, teacher," he said, bowing his head, his red eyes reflecting determination. "Now close your eyes and completely transform into your mana," Katya ordered, her voice calm and confident. "Feel how it is born in you, how it flows through every cell, and imagine that you are manifesting the image in reality. With its help, each word was a guide." Mana bubbled around Derek, his body enveloped in a mysterious blue glow as he sank into meditation. "His natural mana reserves are brilliant," Katya noted with a faint smile, "and thanks to his combat experience, his control over it is surprisingly stable." Derek's eyes flared with a bright, unearthly light, and mana flowed from them, heralding the awakening of a resounding power. At that moment, her gaze, usually so calm, flickered with the realization of his student's true potential. Suddenly, a sunstroke shook the tavern. A roar was heard that made the walls shake, disrupting the world's learning. "What's that noise? What was that?" someone screamed, and panic began to spread among those present. "What's going on outside?" New military voices rang out, chaos threatening to engulf the peace. "We're under attack? Check it out right now." Derek, despite his young age, quickly came to his senses, his gaze instantly becoming complex and clear. But before he could move, Katie Strode's hand grabbed his forearm. "Master?" he asked, sensing more than just a halt in her touch. Katya threw him a short word, but an authoritative order. "Derek, follow me," and not a word. The whole street shook from the explosion. People rushed about, trying to understand what had happened, but Katya, taking Derek away, seemed to dissolve into the commotion, moving towards an unknown exit. "Teacher?" His voice was full of confusion. It wasn't always the reason for such haste. She turned around, and her gaze was not just a request, but a demand for complete complexity. "Okay," Derek replied, his scarlet eyes fixed on her, ready to take in every word. "The nobility jealously guards its privileges, and magic is the elegant one," she began her lesson. "Innate power is considered a divine gift, but only for those born in golden cradles. It's rare for mere mortals to surpass the second circle, but what he accomplished? That second star's illusion spell that created the auditory hallucination was a miracle." From then on, Katya became his mentor, managing him, teaching him the intricacies of magic and the secrets of high society. So a year flew by, full of discoveries and learning, but the time came to part, and Katya left. Word reached Derek that she had been hired as a personal tutor in the powerful county of Elvester. House Elvester was a name that even the capital of the Grand Duke had to take into account. Their power was undeniable. Their influence rested on Count Elvester, who was capable of moving mountains. And for Katya, this proposal was dark, from which it was impossible to win. Becoming a magic teacher for such a powerful family was a gift of fate, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Left alone, Derek did not lose heart, his fingers habitually turning the pages of ancient grimoires. He mastered 2 more complex spells of the second star on his own, his skill growing steadily. And so, years later, within the walls of the Bilden's Tier Tavern, a familiar voice broke the silence, foreshadowing a new adventure. The conversation about the new task began, and the innkeeper's tone immediately made it clear that the matter was serious. The innkeeper's eyes lit up with greed, and he uttered the name that echoed in everyone's minds, Duplin, like a mantra of the power of the rich. Derek, although young, was in no hurry to give in to delight. His eyes betrayed thoughtfulness and a bit of suspicion. But the tavern owner, blinded by the royal radiance, did not want to listen to doubts, seeing before him only countless riches. He shook Derek's hand, trying to convey the scale of the opportunities that were opening up, the prospects that this contract promised. And again, Derek, not giving in to trust, returned to the conversation about the essence, which required specifics. The response was an absurdly simple condition, a simple cleansing of monsters on the borders of the duchy's lands. Derek caught the tossed coin, its shine seeming too bright, the task on his own too easy for such a powerful family. A vague premonition awoke in the serious young men, a harbinger of hidden danger, for behind the glittering facade of the soul, something sinister often lurks. His intuition screamed danger, and Derek refused without hesitation, heading for the exit, but an angry voice called out to him. He turned around, his gaze cold and hard, confirming the immutability of his obstacles. He had not taken a step forward with the unknown. The innkeeper exclaimed in despair that there was no way out, because this job required a magician, and such a one was hard to find among the mercenaries. And then the whole truth came to the surface. Derek was their navigational hope, an irreplaceable link in this chain of events. However, Derek remains unwavering. His rational logic and heart consider strange, incomprehensible transactions. But the innkeeper wasn't going to back down so easily, and his fist slamming onto the table made Derek stop. And then a single gold coin began to glitter on the table. An insignificant amount by Duplin standards, but for a mercenary, a decent advance. The gold lay cold and heavy in Derek's hand, and doubt flickered in his scarlet eyes as he struggled between principle and inevitability. At that moment, new figures entered the tavern, an elderly gentleman with a monocle, his lovely companion, and a mysterious girl in a hood. The stranger with the monocle, addressing Derek, reminded him of the need to support young people, but the young man seemed categorical. The old man looked at Derek with distrust, not understanding how much your view of the boy, despite the rumors about his past, could be assigned to this task. However, the young man's companion, a man with a strong figure and a strong gaze, hastened to intervene, claiming that Derek was a true professional and a magician whom he knew. The old man with the monocle merely shook his head, not wanting to entrust such a responsible task to a young man, even despite the praise. Meanwhile, a sense of unease hung in the atmosphere, and one of the companions delicately touched the old man, as if to indicate that she would soften the onlooking conflict. The tension grew beneath him as the mysterious, hooded figure gazed at him, his presence adding a touch of mystery to the scene. At that moment, the old man turned to Derek, his tone softening, inviting the young man to a personal conversation, as if hoping to find a common language. And then the picture changes, transporting us to a peaceful landscape, where a fresh wind sways the treetops and the sun caresses the mountain slopes. But the calm was deceptive. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, a goblin rushed to the ground, struck by a powerful charge of blue magic. It's Derek. His gaze, like two red coals, glows with determination, foreshadowing a fierce battle. The second blow, sharp and merciless, pierces the flesh, and scarlet blood stains the green grass. The young man moves swiftly, his blade cutting through the air, leaving behind only a trail of blood and the anticipation of victory. Through the bloody spray, his gaze remains unwavering, every movement a mortal threat to the enemy. The blade of the sword, shining and merciless, repelled the last convulsions of the defeated enemy. But the threat is not over. A new goblin, maddened with rage, rushes at the young man, waving an axe. Derek blocks the blow, demonstrating not only magical power, but also mastery of the blade. A powerful swing. The steel whistles through the air, delivering the decisive blow. Darkness thickens around the young man. His red eyes glow with an otherworldly fire, and he himself seems to be the embodiment of an ancient power. The goblin's face was twisted in death throes as he met his inevitable end. The battlefield is littered with fallen enemies, and Derek, surrounded by a halo of blue magic, rises above them like an ancient guardian. "I'm finished, sir," the young man says, his gaze still piercing, but no longer with its former fury. Drops of blood froze on his cloak and letter, evidence of the power he had experienced, but now everything was quiet. The old officer's reaction was obvious. He was impressed. The companion, barely holding back a smile, noticed that the young man dealt with the enemies in no time. It seemed like it was a trivial task. But the scene changes, and now we find ourselves at the doors of the Belden's Tier Tavern, where a new drama is being watched. Inside, a young, angry girl, Pelin, lashes out at someone, calling him a dog nobleman. The bartender tries to calm her down by reminding her about the customers, but Pelin does not relent, declaring that commoners, no matter how pathetic they are, should not serve nobles. Her rage is focused on the capital. How much did they pay for Derek to cast aside his pride? The bartender corrects her with a grin. Crawling on his knees wasn't part of the terms. And when he is a fortress, just one silver coin, Pelin's eyes widen with indignation. But the smirk on the bartender's face suggests she was wrong. Golden! And now Pelin's eyes light up with greed, her indignation instantly turning to avarice. She is immediately ready to retreat from her measures for the sake of such money, but the bartender's respect stops her attempt, repeating that no one needs to crawl. Time flows unnoticed into the twilight blue, heralding new conversations and new discoveries. Later, when Pelin had already fallen asleep, the bartender asked our hero how he had delivered the order, hinting at a past incident. The young man calmly replies that only a few goblins were killed, but the bartender remembers that the listeners are quite wealthy. And then the hero's face darkens. He says that all three were lying. The bartender is surprised. Really? The young man begins to reveal the deception. The noble officer, according to him, was looking for youth, endurance, and eloquence, but this man had none of these things. The woman who presented herself as a dishwasher also aroused suspicion. Her hands were too clean for dirty work. The young man then turns his gaze to the trainee inspector, calling him by name, Derek. His sidelong glance looks intently at the essence of things, not giving a single chance to lies. The bartender, not admitting the significance of his observations, only reminds them that they are mercenaries, and their job is simply to do the job for pay, without delving into the details. Derek just gives a short, "Okay," in response, and there's no doubt in his words, just a cold, thoughtful look. The bartender, it seemed, had not expected anything else, merely summing up that, for them, mercenaries, everything else was just empty details that had no significance. And so, the next day, the dawn of a new task illuminated the Grand Duchy of Duplain. The victory was absolute, the goblins were defeated, and Derek confidently declares that now they will not dare to set foot on these lands for a long time. These include representatives of the duchy who are inspecting the border field, where an ominous silence reigns. One of them, with a monocle, praises them for their excellent work, and the bartender, without wasting any time, immediately starts talking about the remaining payment. 2 gold coins sparkle in the palm of your hand, their shine enticing and dazzling. The bartender exclaims happily, anticipating the possibilities, but Derek, with his usual seriousness, only asks him to put down his coins and listen. An embarrassed, interrupts their conversation, drawing their attention. It turned out that the gentleman with the monocle had a new proposal, because Derek's skills had made an indelible impression on him. The bartender grabs Derek's head in surprise, his voice full of bewilderment. "Excuse me?" And then comes the official financial sum, which makes the bartender say the words, 15 gold coins. The official's gaze is fixed carefully on Derek, waiting for an answer. Will you take it? And Derek, without change, with cold determination in his eyes, says only one word, yes. The sound of the hoof announces the beginning of a new path, a new connection calling them into the distance. The carriage rumbles as they drive away, leaving behind forgotten battlefields. Before them will be the final facade, the embodiment of power and history. The residence of the Duplins, the Grand Duchy, opens its gates to them. Derek, discovering something unexpected for the first time, looks around at the impressive owners of the Grand Duke. The bartender silently surveys the luxury around him, every corner whispering of power. The stranger, who turned out to be the owner of the estate, spoke, his voice heavy and filled with restrained depth. He introduced himself as Dellen, the Grand Duke's own chief administrator, and was accused of the former modesty dictated by the specifics of his service. Derek looks over at Jaden, who looks confused and bewildered as he takes in everything that's happening. A woman stood nearby, introducing herself with a warm smile as Katerina, the duchy's head maid. Jaden, feeling the gravity of the situation, quickly bowed, identifying himself as the captain of the mercenary squad. Jaden's inner voice echoed his confusion. Those he took for simple servants are key figures of the duchy. But then, upon closer attention, the rustle of footsteps, soft and confident, seemed to appear from the direction of the entrance. Jaden and Derek turned around in unison, their eyes filled with a premonition of something even more significant. The stranger, gracefully threw back her hood. Strands of dark hair fell over her shoulders, shimmering in the rays of light. Jaden froze, amazed by the suddenly revealed picture. An elegant voice spoke the name, Aislinn Eleanor Duplin, and immediately voiced its intention to appoint Jaden as a magic teacher for his younger sister. The eldest daughter of the Duplain house stood before them, her words echoing throughout the courtyard. My fate as a mercenary. A magic tutor for a noble lady? Jaden's mind was filled with only one question, utter disbelief and surprise. At the same time, inside the last residence of Duplain, where every stone breathed history and power, a sharp blow shattered the silence, and the massive doors swung open with a deafening crash. The young woman, unable to contain her emotions, burst into the office, demanding the attention of her father, Valerian. His steps echoed loudly through the decoration of the hall, bringing with them excitement. Valerian, sitting at the table, stood up, his voice stern and calm, demanding that Rhaega look at him with appropriate behavior. But Rhaeg was too much part of his own news to listen to the censure. Tears appeared on the maid's face, reflecting deep despair. Her world collapsed under the pressure of unfair accusations and her own helplessness. Valerian, with cold fury in his eyes, instructed Rhaeg to lower his voice, reminding him of the need to maintain power. But Rhaega couldn't stop himself. He unleashed a barrage of accusations against his father regarding the negligent Diela. His voice breaking, he takes action, wondering how long his father will indulge her conclusions. Then Valerian, unable to bear it any longer, exploded with an angry shout, causing Rhaeg to freeze. In a perfectly calm but icy tone, Valerian gave the order, "Enough. Go away." Rhaeg, however, did not give in, reminding his father of his other sister, Aislinn, in whom he saw hope. He believes it is time to release Diela, hinting at her uselessness and inability to control herself. Valerian removed his glasses, his gaze becoming precise and unyielding, cutting off Rhaeg's path to further judgment. But Rhaeg was already furious, his face filled with indignation at his father's words. Suddenly, Valerian grabbed his son by the collar, demonstrating his absolute power. The son was thrown back, his body hitting the floor, which confirms the inflexibility of the head of the family. Valerian's eyes flashed with anger as he reminded Reg of his place and the impossibility of making such decisions. His powerful hand pinned Reg to the floor, and the name, spoken with menace, sounded like a death sentence. With blood on his lips, Reg still dared to challenge, hinting at the inevitability of a choice. Valerian looked at his son silently, his gaze icy and unwavering. At this tense moment, two new figures appeared in the hall, attracting everyone's attention. With a soft smile, the young lady became interested as she listened to those present talk about her younger sister Diela. Her words about Deal, a little-known figure, were spoken with a subtle smile, foreshadowing new mysteries to come. But before Diela's secret could be revealed, the last door swung open with a bang, letting in a new figure. All eyes turned to the newcomer, and one of the men cried out, calling him Valerian, clearly taken by surprise. Valerian greeted Iselin with a casual smile and asked how she was getting on in Eppelstein. The girl, closing her eyes, modestly replied that thanks to his care she felt very comfortable. Valerian noted with slight nonchalance that his companion Reg had received a minor injury and suggested postponing the conversation. Meanwhile, a sharp, piercing gleam flashed in the young magician's medical eyes. He watched Valerian and his companion closely, trying to guess their true intentions. His gaze, full of hidden strength, did not launch a single idea, as if anticipating future events. At that moment, his gaze slid to the crying maid, as if he associated her suffering with someone's secret game. His face reflected restraint, but deep down, one could read complete readiness for any turn of fate. The scene changes. In a more intimate work, Iselin's father evoked in her the joy of her relationship away from home. With a charming smile, Iselin introduced her companion, the magic teacher from Ebelstein who taught Diela. The father, squinting, only briefly said, I see," his face remaining inscrutable. Aislinn, considering the conversational ending, said goodbye gracefully, pretending to leave with the young magician. But the father's stern voice stopped them, ordering the young man to leave. The young magician froze, his gaze unchanged, but the silence that followed was more eloquent than words. Iselin left him alone in the spacious room, flooded with light from the high windows. Meanwhile, the father continues to write something with a pen on the parchment, creating his own unpredictable result. Finally, looking up, he turned to the youth, noting his youth and specifying his age, 16 years old. The young magician sitting on the sofa calmly answered with a short, "Yes." The Grand Duke, with a hint of irony, asked if the student was displaying any magic, at least to some extent. The answer was a calm current. Magic is only the first stars. A condescending smile touched his lips, and his gaze from under his glasses became even more penetrating. Having collected himself, the Duke remarked that young men had no reason to lie, and that modesty was not always perceived as a virtue. The young man's face took on a thoughtful expression, as if he were digesting the words. And then a powerful aura enveloped Grand Duke Duplin, causing the air around him to shimmer. Apparently, this modesty was alien to the fifth star. Feeling the change in the atmosphere, the Duke, with a slight bow, apologized for his frankness. But the young man merely waved it off, uttering strange words about the destructive degree of talent's development. The Grand Duke narrowed his eyes again, assessing the modest appearance of his interlocutor. In his opinion, this youth in no way resembled a magic teacher for an aristocrat. However, the young man only calmly revealed his true profession. He is a mercenary. The Grand Duke leaned back in his chair, accepting Aisling's choice without further question. He gave permission to enter the residence where Diela lived. The order was given to come to the maid, but the young man, before leaving, decided to ask one more question. The Duke, clearly intrigued, gave a short solution. The mercenary reminded that for him, the accepted order was a sacred duty which he would fulfill to the end. He clarified that his goal was to teach Lady Diela magic. After all, this is precisely why Aislinn hired him in high society. The Duke, not hiding his bewilderment, asked why the young man was saying such obvious things. The Duke still couldn't understand why, out of all the candidates, did Aisling choose Derek? After all, the teacher of magic warriors line up, in turn, to serve such a noble family as Duplain. Moreover, it would be extremely difficult for a commoner, even a gifted one, to become a mentor to an aristocrat. But Aislinn, in turn, justified herself by saying that she had tried almost all the famous masters on the continent. They all, without exception, gave in when faced with the unyielding nature of young Diela. So she decided to look for magicians who found themselves in desperate situations and were ready to do anything. Yes, Derek had a past as a mercenary, which did not add to his honor. However, Aislinn felt that he was familiar with the etiquette and culture of high society. After all, his mentor was a fallen but once very successful noblewoman who taught him a lot. He seemed refined and kind to me, despite his rough profession, Aisling insisted. I hoped that he could gently rein Deela in and set her on the right path, she finished. The Duke merely chuckled condescendingly. Ho ho, Lady Aisling, you need to understand people better. Derek is a street magician, he continued, looking at her without condescension. He worked as a mercenary long before he came of age, learning the cruelty of the world from a young age. Do you really think that someone on the streets was able to survive only through sophistication and kindness? The Duke's words stunned Aisling, leaving her speechless and questioning her judgment. Suddenly, the door swung open and a young magician entered the room silently. Every step he took was filled with hidden power, echoing in the silence. He slowly turned towards the door, for the service rendered to him, which he had to curb. A gloved hand confidently rested on the cold door handle. The door swung open, revealing a figure frozen in an unnatural pose, but the silence of the room was only a harbinger of bad events, because this fragile maiden, who had spoken half-heartedly, opened her eyes and a predatory smile flitted across her lips. A sudden blow and a cold wave crashed down on the newcomer, catching him off guard. Now he stood, soaking wet, with his eyes closed, as if trying to wash away the unexpected humiliation. And there she was, his tormentor, with false surprise in her voice, exclaiming about some kind of misunderstanding. There was an undisguised prediction in her words when she compared him to a garbage rat. She continued to humiliate him, questioning his identity and again calling him a garbage rat. Her hand rested casually on the back of the chair, demonstrating complete composure and superiority. She threw her leg over the chair, playing with words, her posture exuding arrogance and defiance. With a devilish grin, she showed the empty tub, although she asked if it was similar to him in his home, and she mercilessly added that it was in this form that he looked most suitable. He took her words in silence, letting the water run down his face, but inside, a storm of unspoken emotions raged. With feigned disappointment, she remarked that the water was gone, feigning disappointment at the end of her humiliating performance. But suddenly his eyes opened wide, and an aloe flame flared in them, foreshadowing imminent retribution. Her arrogance suddenly turned to surprise as she felt the change in his gaze. In response to his impudent interest, she exploded with angry concern as he looked at her. The scene froze. The humiliated mercenary now held in his hand the one who had just carried him. A curse, mixed with growing fear, sounded on her lips. Trying to regain the initiative, she dismissively remarked that he stunk. But he only looked into her eyes, his eloquent gaze speaking only without saying a word. Trying to regain control, she dismissively remarked that he stunk, but he merely looked into her eyes, his eloquent gaze, silent and silent. She leaned sharply on the table as if trying to hold on, her composure slipping. Then, with a haughty smirk, she raised her leg, mocking him whatever led her. The room seemed to hold its breath, understanding this unceremoniousness, as if the space itself was awaiting the denouement. At that moment, the Duke was at the window, his back to him, his gaze directed somewhere into the distance. There was a deep thoughtfulness on his face, foreshadowing something that was about to be said. However, another man, with a cold, clear voice, made it clear that his presence here meant that the problem with Lady Diesla's gaze was much deeper than it seemed. He turned to the Duke, asking for complete carte blanche to act, since he, like no one else, desired the true good. The Duke, looking closely at the young man through the surface of his glasses, seemed to be weighing every risk, every possible figure. Suddenly, her entire haughty demeanor crumbled, replaced by fear and confusion as reality hit her hard in the face. Aggressively and mercilessly, with eyes burning red, the young man ordered her to write an article. A sharp, deafening sound, like a slap in the face from fate, pierced the ensuing silence. She blushed and looked up without laughing, continuing to look at the floor, her world turned upside down. He stood over her, his hands clapping slowly and mockingly as she continued to crawl on her knees in abject humiliation. His face expressed cold determination, and in his eyes there was a steel that left no room for his former manners. Humiliated, she continued to let go, as if unable to rise, feeling only fragments of her dignity. The carriage rocked rhythmically on the dusty road, taking them away from palace intrigues into the unknown. On the way, the young man, replacing anger with thoughtfulness, turned to his companion, asking how to teach someone who does not appreciate kindness. The teacher, adjusting her hair, replied that she tried to understand such a student, accept him, and surround him with care. But the young man, doubting such an idealistic approach, asked what to do if even this did not sacrifice the result. The teacher's face darkened, and she seemed to throw off her mask and said coldly, "To instill fear in them." The words pierced the young lady, causing her to recoil, pressing her palm to her cheek. Meanwhile, the boy, without turning around, asked her to get up, reminding her of the importance of culture. But Diela, trembling with indignation, had no intention of obeying him. In a sudden fit of rage, she rushed towards him, trying to stop. "How ridiculous you are, you insignificant commoner you would raise your hand against." Her voice broke off mid-sentence. She made out the stiff cotton fabric, and a searing pain seared her cheek. The boy turned around, his scarlet eyes blazing with undisguised menace. A laugh of despair burst from her chest, mixed with bewilderment. "Butler!" she screamed. "What is he doing? This upstart dared to touch me." Barefoot and disheveled, she stood before him, unable to contain her righteous anger. In the noise at the palace, his usually imperturbable face expressed horror. "Lady Diela, are you okay?" He rushed towards her, full of sound. Grabbing the young man by the hand, the butler angrily asked how he dared to raise his hand against a lady, threatening to report him to the Duke. In response, the boy only silently handed him a folded parchment. "His lordship has granted me complete power over Lady Diela," he said calmly, looking the palace official straight in the eyes. "The document, sealed with the family seal, states that he is allowed to use any methods he sees fit." The butler, reading the lines through his monocle, muttered shakily, "This, uh... The young lady, looking at the pale palace, finally realized the full weight of her gaze. A cold moon shone in the mansion, where the night promised to be only the beginning of your nightmare. Fury pierced the air as Valerian, poorly provided, rushed forward. His cry broke the silence, an accusation of a monstrous act, and the object of his anger only raised a calm, indifferent gaze. A new outburst of aggression, an attempt at revenge for the insult inflicted on Diela. But the mercenary, without a shadow of emotion, uttered words that the participants in the discussion outraged common sense. Iceland's name sounded like a death sentence, and Valerian, stunned, was forced to retreat. Pride demanded a continuation, and Valerian took the stranger away to read, leaving Rhaega in his thoughts. And Reg, with a slight smile, seemed to foresee the further course of events and their hidden meaning. In Turkey, a cold, calculating glint flashed through the scarlet eyes. Reg, watching them, could not understand the reason for this strange protection and ancient wound. They walked into a room where even the light seemed alien, snatching frozen shadows of the past from the darkness. "Come in," a low voice said, opening the door to a forgotten corner of someone's soul. It was a room that had not changed since young Diela had spoken. On the easel, he waited for the completion of his unfinished landscape, full of delicate colors. Valerian treated Diela with pain and tenderness, his hobbies and embarrassment, which caused him to praise him. But her work always remains unfinished, as if she lacks the ability to finish what she started. Then Valerian, overcoming his pride, apologized for my outburst of anger. But the mercenary did not see this necessity and did not understand the meaning of this visit. Valerian wanted to show him another Diela before her obsession with blood purity had consumed her innocence, and how this attachment turned the sweet girl into one that all participants were expelled from their home. Valerian was ready to do anything to save Diela from a bitter fate, desperately looking for any way out. And then, suddenly, someone from Diela's past turned to him with the same plea that tormented his heart. But something in the words or the books he held made him come, sensing a thread of hope. After all, the notes in the margins, like secret messages, whispered that Diela had not finally returned from magic. And if Diela, like all noble districts, is a theory from the School of Charters, then the fire of magic is still warming up inside her. A new, daring plan flashed in his eyes, one that could change her destiny. Time passed, and night fell upon the mansion, hiding its secrets and intentions. And Valerian, clutching a textbook on magic in his hands, prepared for his interaction and unexpected step. He made this decision, doomed to risk, but full share in the protection for Diela. With trepidation, he held out the book, like a key to salvation, to the one who slept in an inner and serene sleep. In the luxurious memories, illuminated by the moonlight, there reigned a silence, foreshadowing the imminent storm. Diela lay on a satin bed, unaware that this dream was the last minutes of her illusory peace. Suddenly, an icy stream of water, charged with magic, crashed down on her, piercing her with a frosty shock. A scream of horror tore through the silence as Diela awoke with a start, choking with cold and uncontrollable rage. Valerian stood before her, holding an empty bucket in his hands, and his sly smile foreshadowed nothing but insolence. What are you doing?" she cried, not believing her eyes, feeling anger boiling inside her. "Come with me. We need to go somewhere and we don't have time," he said calmly, holding out his hand. "Let go. How dare you touch me? Are you completely out of your mind?" Diela screamed, trying to break free from his grip. Resistance was futile. Valerian dragged her through the corridors, under the astonished and offended glances of the maids. That night, under the gaze of the full moons, their destinies intertwined in a whirlwind of unexpected and irreversible events. Valerian pulled her out of the house, continuing his way through the dark, glowing, moonlit forest, ignoring the resistance. Suddenly, he stopped, turned sharply, and pushed her away from him. She collapsed to the ground, unable to withstand the confident scream. Through the pain and confusion, rage broke through. She demanded submission, doubting his right to act this way. But Valerian only smiled awkwardly, suggesting that she hear something interesting. His eyes flashed an ominous red as he opened them. Magic had never been the purpose of his visit. "I just enjoy beating up arrogant nobles," he said with frank cynicism. These words crashed down on Valerie, paralyzing her with horror and bewilderment. "Don't you agree?" he continued, looking at her mockingly. "One who comes from the lower classes has no reason to love the nobility." All talk of tutoring, according to him, was just an excuse, convenient and broad for his cruel amusements. In this top-down look, full of predatory superiority, Valeria saw only a harbinger of her country. With a clang, Valerian drew his sword, finally erasing the line between threat and intent. "You think you can get away with this?" she cried out in despair. "Of course," he answered cynically. "You'll soon be sent to a monastery anyway." And he added, as if trying to convince himself, "Who will believe your words?" "And if something goes wrong, I'll simply atone for the wine of my life," he responded indifferently. "A commoner's life is worth that much, right?" He bared his teeth, his eyes flashing red again, saying, "Or I could just run away. They'll forget about me quickly, right?" In the end, Valeria saw herself in his sinister eyes, just a tool that he was ready to throw away, having fulfilled his whim. Her cry of despair and pain tore through the silence of the night, but no one heard it in this wilderness. Unable to bear it any longer, she began to run, away from his ominous presence, into the frightening darkness of the forest. She ran without looking where she was going. Every rustle seemed like a chase to her. Tripping over roots and rocks, she desperately tried to break away. But suddenly, like an icy prick, realization flashed through her. Just behind me, in the night air, a ball of pure, untamed energy pulsed. He, this creepy stranger, stood as if nothing had happened, easily summoning destructive power. Fireball, magic of such a high level? Her mind refused to believe that only a select few possessed such power. And he was an ordinary hunter, but there was a hidden threat in his posture. A smile crossed his lips, foreshadowing the inevitable disaster. And the ball, obeying its own will, began to appear sharply. Heat burned her cheeks, foreshadowing the imminent blow. She fell, avoiding the straight direction, but the magic came down in a deafening explosion that shook the earth. The shockwave threw her like a rag doll onto the hot ground. Shock took my breath away. The world around me darkened with pain and agony. And he, with his eyes glowing red, just smiled smugly, as if it was just a game. A full moon rose over the forest, indifferently illuminating the site of the tragedy. The night sky, evidence of the whole nightmare, remained silent. In the African forest, where silence once reigned, now only the smell of burning lives. But even wounded, she rose and rushed forward again, not daring to look back. Her eyes burned with defiance, only pain fueling her rage. But every step brings a new wave of pain, causing you to stumble over roots. And then she collapsed again, sprawled powerlessly on the cold ground. Through the groan of pain, she forced herself to get up, not allowing despair to overwhelm her. A blue light erupted in her gaze, a harbinger of new danger. Like lightning, a bright arrow flashed past, miraculously missing her. She dropped to one knee, realizing that her pursuer was still there. From the shadows, he announced, mockingly noting her unexpected agility. His words only added fuel to the fire of her desperate struggle. She rushed forward again, not by chance, to run, but it is known that there is nowhere she can surrender. He chuckled faintly, looking at her as if he were playing with his victim. Thoughts raced through her head. How much strength was left, and was there any hope for salvation? But even fear could not break her revolution in life. Meanwhile, the pursuer fell silent to call for new ones. His gaze slid along the path she ran along, as if it were a map. At that moment, familiar images came to his aid, forest landscapes she had once painted. He realized that this forest was her home, which led to his hidden power. And a sudden realization struck him. Had he underestimated her? But there was no time to think. In a desperate lunge, she lifted the boulder filled with mana. Her frantic scream echoed through the forest, foreshadowing the inevitable collision. The blade glowed with an ominous light, ready to fall down at any moment. The air was filled with tension. The death groan seemed inevitable. The merciless blow was aimed straight at her, leaving no chance of salvation. Desperate fear painted her features, but a spark of defiance still burned in her eyes. The enemy seemed to only mock his own attempts, noting the strength of her spirit. Trapped, she realized that attacking back was her only, albeit doomed, choice. Each leader gave her a hard time. Her body trembled from fatigue and hopelessness. The pursuer's gaze was cold and indifferent. He saw her complete exhaustion. The blade hung over her like a sentence, awaiting her final, powerless words. But instead of a plea, a bitter, mocking laugh burst from her chest. She threw down the gauntlet, refusing to humiliate herself before someone whose school was beneath her. Her dignity, dented and tarnished, still clung to the remnants of her former pride. He did not understand this obsession, this fanatical belief in the superiority of the noble family. But for her, that was all. Take away her blue blood, and all that was left was emptiness. In desperation, she again called upon magic to find her hope. Under the full moon, her eyes, full of tears, stared at the surface. Hadn't he seen her progress? Did he dare say she hadn't fought? But the killer's gaze remains impenetrable, without the slightest hint of compassion. Her whole life seemed to be a series of fruitless fortunes and bitter disappointments. Without her name, without her magic, without her talent, what would remain of her? A complete, unbearable emptiness. Who will I be? This question, full of despair, echoed in the silence of the night. He was silent, his gaze was secretive, but a difficult decision could be read in every gesture. Suddenly, the blade in his hand flashed with a blinding blue light, foreshadowing the inevitable. Holding her breath, she watched as her fate took on deadly shapes. "I have heard enough," he said, and the words pierced her heart sharper than any blade. "Goodbye," he added, and that tiny migraine became an eternity for her. The air split from a powerful blow, carrying within it a destructive, icy force. Sharp, shining crystals instantly grew around them, piercing the ground like icy spears. Her eyes reflected horror, mixed with the bitterness of unfulfilled hopes and deep disappointment. Through a veil of tears, she thinks to discern at least some meaning in the madness that is happening. The sword plunged into the ground, surrounded by glittering peaks that formed around the ice barrier. Sparks of magical energy soared into the night sky, illuminating the lonely, indifferent moon. The numbness gave way to shock. She found herself in the center of something completely incredible. A blue glow descended around her, enveloping her like an invisible but tangible veil. She found herself trapped in icy shackles, but this was not a consequence. It was something much deeper. A soft blue light emanated from her natural hands. Was this magic? He carefully touched the hilt of his sword, watching her reaction carefully. "Excellent work, Lady Dila," he said with a slight smile, apologizing for his rudeness. Tears still glistened on her cheeks, but now they contained not fear, but stunning amazement and hope. "It's not true magic yet, just echoes of mana," he explained, "but you still managed to awaken it." The echoes of mana responded in her with unbearable pain, a burning cold that took her breath away. A cry of despair burst from her chest, wild, unbridled, full of primal fear and unforeseen strength. Around her, at the call of that cry, sharp peaks of ice, frozen fragments of her own pain, shot up. The young sorceress, exhausted, fell to the ground, surrounded by a suddenly born ice crown. The mana seemed to vibrate in the air, causing the surrounding world to shimmer with a mysterious blue light. Now, under the full moon, pouring silver light over the silent forest, she listened to his words. "You belong to the school of wildlife," he said, and her eyes were filled with complete incomprehension. He explained that the school of magic is unique and based on uniform principles, but the methods of mastering it differ. For her, who was trying to understand magic through the strict theories of the school of Ustavov, it was like putting on someone else's clothes. "How do you know that?" she asked, puzzled, shocked by the depth of his insight. "I saw your drawings," came his calm reply, as if opening the secret place of her soul. "You felt the mana that was in nature and transferred it to the canvas, unconsciously," he explained. "Mages born with an affinity for the wild discover this from childhood, even before knowledge arises." Awareness slowly dawned in her eyes, the mosaic of her life suddenly turning into a single, amazing picture. "Well, that's enough," he interrupted her thoughts. "Now we can go." But internally she recognized her potential. Mana had awakened, but the road ahead was long, and he promised to teach her the adapter of this power in this way. "Derek!" She called his name softly, feeling for the first time not only fear, but also genuine gratitude. Thank you," she blurted out timidly, but with echoes of confidence in her voice. He didn't answer, just a brief impression. His face remained inscrutable but decisive. "Let's go," he said, and she, as if led by an invisible force, hurried after him to a new, unknown path. She was asked about the sunset painting, wondering if it was her doing, but she just shook her head absently, admitting that it had been a long time since she had touched a brush. Night gave way to morning, and the first rays of the sun burst into her room, flooding every corner with light. The awakening was abrupt, and Dila started in bed, as if emerging from the depths of her disturbing thoughts. She tried to summon power, feeling the faint echoes of magic shimmering in the air around her hands. A struggle, mixed with slight disappointment, flashed in her eyes when she failed to completely subdue this ancient energy. "It's complicated," she whispered, gathering the steadily elusive grains of magic. At that moment, a maid came to the door with a bucket, busy with her usual morning chores. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Dila, not having time to retreat, collided with a frightened maid, who screamed in surprise. The bucket slipped from her hands, and cold water splashed loudly across the floor. Streams of water hit the hem of her dress, but a faint blue aura shimmered around Diela, protecting her from the true cold. The maid, trembling with fear, immediately fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness for her mistake. Diela's face remained cold, her gaze piercing the servant, expressing neither sympathy nor anger. "This is a mortal sin. Please forgive me," the maid repeated, pressing herself to the floor, awaiting the inevitable punishment. "Watch where you're going," Diela said, her voice lacking any sympathy, just a distant direction. To the maid's surprise, the mistress merely returned and continued on her way, leaving her perplexed. The other maids ran to comfort the frightened girl, whispering about what had happened the previous night and why the lady had changed so much. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, her brother Derek slept peacefully, unaware of his sister's awakening and changes. A sudden, loud call tore him out of his sleep, and he didn't even raise his head, shielding his eyes from the bright light. Rubbing his red eye, Derek asked with a disgruntled expression what had happened, his voice full of sleepy irritation. The older gentleman's stern voice reminded Diela of her manners, but her gaze directed at him was an undisguised challenge. Diela, becoming impatient, demanded that she be immediately taught how to control the mana that had awakened, since she hadn't been able to do anything on her own. The elderly gentleman was shocked by this sudden statement, his face contorted in astonishment. Diela, looking straight ahead, reminded him of his long-standing promise and demanded that he begin training immediately. "However, your request was met only with a recommendation that came during the day," and Diela, annoyed, left the room. The gentleman noted with relief, rubbing his face with a handkerchief and whispering about the awakening of magic in Lady Diela, and she, smiling outwardly, snorted inwardly with annoyance. Meanwhile, outside the door, the awakened Derek was screaming in rage, demanding that he be immediately turned on and begin training. His angry blows shook the door, giving the estate's inhabitants no peace. The sun shone brightly over the last mansion, but new intrigues were observed inside. Quiet footsteps echoed along the sides of the corridors, foreshadowing the inevitable gossip and rumors. The maids whispered, surprised by the unheard-of calm of the morning. Lady Diela had not broken a single plate. And then one of them, leaning over, breathlessly told the other something even more sensational. Lady Diela's magic had awakened. The footsteps stopped as a man passing by stopped, unwittingly overhearing part of the conversation. The young man turned to the maids with a serious face, demanding confirmation of his identification. While Ron was writing something with a pen in his office, his thoughts were far from the morning bustle. Father confirmed that the main palace and servants had confirmed the awakening of magic several times, but Reg warned against jumping to conclusions. Reg insisted that this small event should not be used as a reason for rash decisions. But another, the last warrior, abruptly interrupted him. A reminder of the breakthrough occurred. With his narrowed eyes and serious face, it was clear that he remembered everything Diela had done up until now. And I would like to emphasize that even such a minor turn of events should have already become a reason not to leave her in the monastery. The Lord, without uttering a word, continues to write, weighing all the consequences of this unexpected turn of events. A new morning dawned on the estate, but for Eliza the sunlight brought no comfort. She still sat there, huddled up, her childish face expressing deep hurt. When the young man who approached asked, she was not offended. A strange calmness could be heard in his voice. While the expansion of the family mansion shone outside the windows, inside there was royal tension. His steps sounded heavy and confident, as if each one was weighed and final. No, she wasn't offended. She was angry, Eliza insisted. But the maids only reassured her that her whims hadn't changed anything. A young man, passing by, echoed them, reminding them of the unshakable order to which everything in this world is subject. His boots stopped, emphasizing the finality of his decision. And again, Eliza stubbornly repeated that her feelings were extremely offensive. It was pure, burning anger. But her interlocutor, reserved and adamant, merely reiterated that no children's protests could be inevitable. "I'm angry." There was a strain in her voice that no one wanted to hear. He looked at her, and his words about the mutability of events and the general order seemed to weigh on her with all the weight of the world. And then the dam of her patience collapsed. A scream burst from her chest, full of despair and rage. He just looked at her intently, his gaze full of an incomprehensible position. Having whispered in a choked voice that perhaps she was sulking after all, Eliza fell silent, but questions were still visible in her eyes. He slowly sat down on a chair, gesturing for her to talk. Awakening magic was not a toy, he reminded her, or it would get out of control, and he knew that from experience. Rest was important, but the time for it was over now. It was time to study, and Eliza just rolled her eyes at his nagging. Of course, a boring magic teacher. What else would you expect from him? Flashed through her thoughts. But at that moment, his eyes flashed an ominous red light, revealing the true power hidden beneath the mask of calm. His smile, accentuated by an evil grimace, was a promise of a nightmare that still haunts him. The memory burned like a red-hot brand, the same man, the same red eyes, but a completely different power that frightened her to the point of trembling. Elaine shuddered, trying to push away the bad feeling, convincing herself that it was just a dream, a ghost of the past. Returning to the mundane, Derek calmly stated that today they would practice friendly magic, and her involuntary trembling almost disappeared. He claims his hands emit a calm glow, talking about the school of wildlife, where there are no strict rules, only freedom and the path of self-development. And, to her surprise, the teacher suddenly declared that she perfectly matched the description that had caused her confusion. His gaze was piercing as he explained that his free-spirited nature was a perfect match for the philosophy of this ancient teaching. And then he added that her Duplain family talent was a gift, a way to change everything, and something inside her twitched. Talented? Flashed through her mind, the word seeming to have real weight for the first time. A blush flooded her cheeks, and a spark of hope, a glimmer of an unknown power, lit up her eyes, which had been full of doubt just that moment ago. Derek confirmed that her ability to create an ice wall was an absolute gift, and Elaine straightened her shoulders and asked, "Am I really a genius?" But he gently retorted that talent and genius were different concepts, causing her to feel a wave of stubborn objection while a bird watched them from the window. "Okay, I'm amazing, and that's it," she conceded. But the conversation had been overheard, and the dark silhouette in the distance didn't hide their disdain. A shadow of irritation flashed across the face of the man standing in the distance, and short, annoyed sounds burst from his chest. Days passed, the sun rose over the last mansion, and each dawn brought new challenges. Once again, Elaine, full of despair, rushed into his presence, trying to master the magic that was trying to get out of control. The next day, during breakfast, she again showed him the chaotic flame, her voice trembling with confusion and impotence. And so, a day later, Elaine ran after the teacher with one of the maids, trying to curb the strange feeling of magic that spread through her veins. And the next day she found him in the garden, alone with a book, as if he had not noticed her development and desperate calls at all. "Derek." Her voice was full of indignation and indignation. "What are you doing here? I told you to stay in the annex." Her voice, sharp as a blade, broke the morning silence, accusing him of celebrating and neglecting his duties. But in response, she heard a surprisingly calm, even bold confirmation of his words, which only increased her anger. However, she insisted on instantly turning her magical abilities, leading all three of them through the sunset-drenched fields. Meanwhile, in the final halls of the estate, a tall man with a piercing gaze stood by the window, deep in thought. His silence was broken by the leisurely steps of Derek, who entered the room at the call, sensing a certain tension in the atmosphere. Sitting down opposite, Derek prepared for conversation when a question came up about young Diela's latest successes. The young man reported without hesitation on her significant progress, but noted that mastering the magic of the first stars still required time. The man listened attentively, and then, changing the subject, warned of the imminent return of his mother, the lady of the estate. He warned Derek about the aristocrat's harsh regime, her dislike of commoners in high positions, and the need to be careful. Derek confirmed that he was aware of the rules, but his look hinted at a deep understanding of the true reason for the call. There was a meaningful pause while the man prepared to carry out his examination, his gaze fixed somewhere into the distance. Finally he turned, reminding them of his future status as head of the Duplain family and the heavy burden that would fall on his shoulders. Being a leader means accepting and supporting every family member, but more importantly, being completely honest with them. However, he immediately admitted that this task is extremely difficult, because the magnetic heart is so deep and sometimes incomprehensible. He talked about how simple it would be if everyone shared the same thoughts and values, but the reality was far from ideal. Derek, who had been listening closely to every word, interrupted him, wanting to understand the true meaning of this flowery speech. The man's response was a smile, and a vague mixture of determination and annoyance appeared on his face. And then he spoke words full of unexpected sorrow, acknowledging that Diela refused to play with him. Derek greeted this revelation with icy calm, covering his thoughts with an impenetrable gaze. The man, as if not noticing his condition, indulged in memories of this, of Diela's childish smile, comparing her to an angel. The man, without lowering his tone, turned to Derek with a question about how to win Diela's favor. After all, only you, Derek, became the beacon that her soul tirelessly follows. Suddenly, from somewhere far away, a piercing cry was heard as Diela searched for Derek. The man quickly intercepted it, holding out something made with his own hands, a doll sewn by a servant. He held a homemade rag doll with Diela's face in his hands, and his voice sounded naive with hope for change. But there was not a shadow of tenderness in Derek's eyes, only cold suspicion, as if what lay before him was not a gift, but a cursed weapon. The man's face took on a sudden look of hurt, and for a moment he showed me the vulnerability he had been carefully hiding. Meanwhile, above the final spires of the Magic Academy, a cloudless morning sky shone, heralding a new day. Inside, among the postal officials, a young mentor greeted Derek with a charming smile. Rumors circulated that the academy had acquired not only a talented student, but that he might also become a great teacher of magic in the future. Morella Dable Duplain appeared, her voice filled with genuine interest in the new student. Her hands showed nobility when she offered to send a gift from her owners to his family. Derek's answer was simple and sharp as the blow of a blade. He did not belong to any noble house. Her polite smile faded, giving way to confusion as she asked if she had heard correctly. A bold fire flashed in his red eyes, confirming what he had shown with imperturbable calm. The shocked teacher struggled to utter the word that would destroy her entire opinion. The academy's outward pomp seemed in contrast to the tension that reigned within its walls after such a statement. Yet, despite this challenge, Morella continued to be attentive to the youth. Perhaps the rumors of a capable magic teacher struck a chord with her normal, long-forgotten ambitions. Her name, Morella Dable Duplain, was heard again as if trying to restore the previous calm atmosphere and take control of the situation. The young people, sharp as blades of words, destroyed it. The air filled with tension as Morella asked again, not believing her ears. And his gaze, cold and determined, confirmed, "I am a commoner." Every word echoed in her head, causing a wave of rage and confusion. But let's look back a whole week to the events that led to this upheaval. Here, at the walls of the necessary residence, Diela expressed her joy and greeted Derek. With a smile that hid the weight of her care, she entrusted her brother with the most precious thing, their younger sister. And Derek, only lowering his gaze, answered briefly, accepting this responsibility. The man their father saw reminded Derek of the trust placed in him. He gave hasty instructions, fearing his mother's condition, while Diela once again raised hope. To the soft clatter of the carriage wheels, Derek left the house, carrying with him a heavy burden of expectations. And then Diela, struck by a sudden insight, realized her mistake. Her mother returned the following week, and to her horror, Derek didn't know about it. Father didn't see anything unusual in this, but Diela had a real understanding of the complexity of the situation. After all, her mother, Mrs. Morella Dable Duplain, was a very special lady. Her footsteps echoed through the corridors, foreshadowing a storm. She burst into the office where Father Grand Duke was immersed in his affairs. Her sudden appearance made him freeze, looking up in bewilderment. And without giving him time to come to his senses, she immediately got to the point, furiously increasing his respect for her daughter. The Grand Duke, trying to calm the storm, only hinted at his reluctance to go against established rules. The Duchess did not calm down, her eyes blazed with righteous anger in honor of Diela. The Grand Duke discreetly reminded him that finding a worthy magic teacher was no easy task, and besides, Derek was responsive to Aislinn. But the Duchess, not listening to the arguments, angrily stamped her foot, demanding that at least some decency and standards be observed. Suddenly a plan formed in her head. There was the Duke's younger brother, Flam, who could teach Diela now that her magic had awakened. The Duke, however, met this idea with cold disapproval, hinting at the irresponsibility of such decisions and the poor level of governance of the estates. She exploded, her voice piercing the air as she spoke of the reputation of the House of Ebelstein and the ruthless rules of high society. "It's all about the teacher's reputation," she exclaimed, not understanding how Diel could be entrusted to a commoner without family or tribe, condemning her to shame. At this tense moment, as if cutting through a thick curtain of anger, Valerian appeared in the doorway. The son calmly approached his mother, trying to soften her ardor, reminding her that they were not here to quarrel. The Duchess merely waved him off coldly, refusing to back down, as she could not turn a blind eye to such a thing. Valerian seemed to be holding his mother back, but there was a hidden thought in his gaze, not just agreement. The Duchess said Rage's name with a note of alarm in her voice, and a confident step filled the room with new tension. Reg, as a judge, delivered his verdict. The offer of a commoner as a magic teacher for a noblewoman was a highly unusual situation. However, he immediately added that if this person had real talents, the problem might not be so great. The Sun stated that he personally tests Derek's abilities and considers his assessment an objective measure. If I defeat him in a magical duel, Reg said, as if throwing down a challenge, then it will be clear he is a true mage. His gaze reflected an unshakable confidence in justice and fairness. But Reg changed the course of events again, and then suggested an unexpected turn. What if we check not him but Diela? Valerian raised an eyebrow in surprise, trying to decipher the true meaning of his brother's word. After all, if Derek really is such a talented mentor, then his student Diela should achieve outstanding results, and Reg is ready to prove it himself in sparring. Valerian pondered what he had heard, trying to understand the secret meaning of what Rega had summoned. But it seemed he was only part of the same alarm, and with a sharp cry he rushed towards his brother. He couldn't think about this crazy idea of a magical duel that had whirled through Reg's words. "How could you forget everything Diela did?" he asked desperately. "Do you really believe she's changed? After all, despite all the misdeeds, she is their blood. They consider her an antivirus." But Reg's contemptuous chuckle split the silence like a blade. "This blood is trying to destroy our kind," he growled, full of rage. "Her debut in the Parliament of Light will be our final downfall." Valerian looked at his brother, not believing his ears. A silent question was read in his eyes. But Reg only turned away, firmly declaring that Diela herself had crossed all conceivable boundaries. He was convinced that the path for her was oblivion in the outbuilding, far from the light. Verbally pushing away these heavy thoughts, Reg noticed that he had clenched his fists and a cold fire was burning in his eyes. And outside, unaware of the palace intrigues, a carefree bird sang its song. Meanwhile, in one of the rooms, Diela burst into Derek's room, screaming his name in panic. Derek, having studied the ancient tomes in depth, calmly wondered about the reasons for such an early and noisy visit. He put down the ancient scroll lying on the book spread and looked up at the agitated Diela. She immediately laid out the reason for her concern. The damage in the magical duel threatened Derek with immediate reproduction. "Yes, I know," Derek answered calmly, studying the parchment. "Reg is an experienced mage. Defeating him will be the basics." Diela was shocked by his calmness, her voice breaking into a scream from despair and indignation. But Derek just smiled, remembering that he was just a mercenary doing his job for pay. And, apparently, he had already filled it. His gaze was serene and far from alarm. The girl seemed not to hear his words, stunned by this icy rationality. Time flies, and a whole week has already passed since then. The imposing estate is met with silence, despite the tension it feels. Duke Diesel, with an unusually stern face, walked at the head of the process. Every step he took was firm and confident, foreshadowing the changes to come. The white-haired youth, maintaining his composure, greeted the Duke with a deep bow. There was a surprising serenity in his bowed figure. The Duke notices his calmness, wondering where the young man gets such confidence from. He was struck by the young man's composure, and his resolve grew stronger. Such a man could not be let go. But, while the Duke was warning, someone else was already silently walking along the corridors of the estate. The man in the dark cloak, clenching his fists, moved towards his goal. This is who he was. He was preparing to challenge the established order. Only one thought was running through his head. Today, he would crush Diesel. His steps echoed with his determination. Every movement spoke of a thirst for space. At the same time, in accordance with this decision of her fate, the girl in the red dress also walked. The hood covers her hair, but it can't hide the worry in her blue eyes. Her voice is full of pain and bewilderment. "Do you really not care what happens as long as your work is paid for?" But Derek doesn't seem to hear her as she calmly talks about her magical growth. This idea that even though the magic of one star is not yet available, it is only a matter of time. And here's the reason. Duplin blood flows through her veins, which confuses the man. Derek, with a mysterious smile, reminds him that he already spoke about the School of Wildlife, where self-study is valued above all else. But Deal responds to the explosion with a desperate cry, her eyes full of tears and bewilderment. "Why are you talking about this now?" she asks, but Derek just looks at her silently. Deal swallows and admits that she is aware of her views as a student, but her determination is unwavering. She wants to study magic only from him. And she doesn't need any mentors. Derek just turns away silently, leaving her words unanswered. He turns around, slowly pulling on his glove, and warns that he is alien to the etiquette and rules of noble magical duels. But he could teach her one thing: how to win any fight. "Do you want to win?" he asked challengingly. Meanwhile, in Deal's subconscious, echoes of the past echoed back. whispering condemnation of her mediocrity. Childhood memories came flooding back, her, little, with a teddy bear, in the presence of dangerous shadows. Voices full of contempt brand her as a burden, compare her to her talented brothers and sisters, predicting shame for the great family. These words, like hot coals, burn her from the inside. And then, through the tears, a flame of determination flares up in her eyes. Yes, make me win. The sky above them seems to respond to this oath, foreshadowing the coming changes. Deal, clad in a scarlet cloak, stands ready to step into a new, unknown life. Derek looked at her intently, his gaze a look of controlled intensity. Her eyes, now bright red, are filled with steely will. She is ready to fight. In the distance, under an azure sky, the name flutters proudly with a coat of arms symbolizing heritage and future. And magical forces, as if awakening this determination, swirl into the air, awaiting their moment. In the spacious arena, under the gaze of the sky and ancient walls, two figures met. The tense silence was broken only by a soft cough. And so, with dignity, the rules of the duel were announced. The one who first activates Pelham's protective circle will be declared the loser. Readiness was evident in every look, in every movement of the muscles. In her hands, she held not just a piece of jewelry, but a magical artifact capable of turning the outcome of the earth by absorbing the most powerful spell. 10 minutes, one of the observers said in the room. Looks like someone is going to finish this much sooner. Without wasting a second, Ray created a force, and emerald streams of energy swirled around his outstretched hand. Ancient runes, flashing with a furious light, framed his figure, foreshadowing the imminent storm. The girl in the red cloak looked at the approaching man without flinching. A concentrated whirlwind of magic, full of destructive power, erupted from his fingertips. "Sorry, but I need you to go back to the outbuilding," came the voice in the air with a slight hint of superiority. A vast, magical world, like the scythe of fate, rushed towards her, ready to sweep away everything in its path. "Diella!" A desperate cry broke the silence as the blow almost caught her. But in her eyes there was nothing but fear, cold determination, and a subtle glint. With one elusive movement she returned, escaping the deadly embrace of magic. How can she meet? Anger and astonishment uttered on the face of her opponent. Off to the side, another man, apparently on his side, clenched his fists, ready to move. And the spell, having flown past its target, continued to cut through the air, losing its power. The force struck, although it missed its target, throwing her back, forcing her to press against the wall. Her gaze, despite the pressure, was unwavering, directed straight ahead. Her observation, watching every movement, noticing a fatal flaw in her technique. But she seems ready to make any sacrifice, erecting crystal barriers in front of herself. He smirks, believing that this primitive defense is not capable of stopping his earthly power. And his magic suddenly bursts from his hands, tearing the air into streams of air. From his fingertips fly arrows of destruction, the power of which carries with it a deadly death. If this is just a trick, he thought to himself, I will break through it with pure firepower. She stands surrounded by the blue glow of ice, and he continues his onslaught without holding back. Meanwhile, on the sidelines, beyond the blazing battle, another drama is unfolding. The blonde girl understands that this is not just a duel, but a battle for survival, where the rules of honor are forgotten. His gaze, scarlet and piercing, seems to penetrate into the very soul, challenging her beliefs. And she, realizing her true goal, shouts out words full of determination and defiance. A flame flares in her eyes, reflecting the profound change that has taken place within. The speed of her movements is stunning. She leans forward sharply, weaving between the ice shards. Every step is a dance with death, every maneuver an attempt to survive and strike back. Her gaze is fixed on the goals, without a place with her beloved, only a pure frantic will to win. The enemy, seeing his persistence, becomes enraged, his magic boiling with renewed vigor. But she's already close. Her attack is sudden and precise, shaking the air around. In an instant, she is back on her feet, ready to continue her daring onslaught. The blow passes by. A light breeze moves the hood she barely left. The barrier ice, although it saved her, shatters into thousands of pieces, but the battlefield does not cool down. A furious fire burns in her eyes, and magic rises to her hands again, preparing for a new blow. But the enemy, clenching his teeth, is not going to retreat. His gaze is firm. And then, in an instant, her face distorts with shock. "It's over," whispers a voice in her head. A powerful blow throws her back. She falls, but the mysterious amulet on her chest flashes with an emerald light. The emerald whirlwind seemed to reach its target, piercing the air. The ground shakes, cracking under the crushing force of the impact, leaving behind only clouds of dust. A desperate cry from a young man is heard in the crowd. Diela! The woman, covering her mouth with her hand, cannot bear the horror at the sight of what happened. Dellen, stop the fight immediately. Diela is wounded. Her pleas hang in the air, but the man only stares blankly at the arena. Sit down. His voice sounds cold and calm. This is not over yet. What? You saw it yourself. The blow hit its target. She can't believe her ears. That's wrong. Pelham's protective circle didn't activate, he counters. His gaze, full of hidden insight, explores every corner of the ruined arena. The young man, sitting to the side, does not take his eyes off the place where Diela fell, trying to comprehend what happened. He didn't even blink, he realizes. So Derek knew Diela had finally grown up? Meanwhile, Derek, unperturbed, slowly turns around, his figure radiating absolute calm. She was bound to be affected, he muses. Why didn't the magic circle work, and where did she go? Suddenly, his eyes widen with a shocking discovery. From beneath the shattered rubble, from the very ground, someone's foot appears, stepping firmly onto the wooden flooring. A crushing wave of ice magic erupts from beneath his feet, marking an unexpected counterattack. The enemy, stunned by the sudden attack, flies to the side, his arrogance instantly disappearing. The force of the blow sends him flying back, leaving behind only clouds of steam and shock. He tries to hold on, desperately clinging to balance, but gravity is inexorable. A silent cry of surprise dies on his lips because he could not have foreseen such a turn of events. There is a mixture of rage and absolute incomprehension in his eyes, and a grimace of anger is depicted on his face. An attack from underneath the platform itself flashes through my head, breaking all conceivable rules. His rational fever searches for clues. According to the rules, restrictions mean defeat. However, the judge only shakes his head slightly, his gaze leaving no room for ambiguity. Why did they imply that passing under the platform doesn't count as leaving it? That's just a dirty trick. And then a sharp, dangerous guess flashes in his favor. And Dazale, without wasting a second, was already approaching his next, even more ruthless step. New streams of icy magic burst from underground, heralding a storm. Razor-sharp ice spikes pierce the platform, surrounding the light on all sides. The battlefield turns into a deadly labyrinth, where every peak is a potential threat. The merciless beauty of Dazale's magic envelops the space, leaving no chance. A cold pot appears on his face, and helplessness and panic fear are reflected in his eyes. I don't see him, but I know that one blow and it will all be over. Despair sounds in his thoughts. He is thrown back by a powerful wave again and falls helplessly, losing his orientation. The world around blurs into a rapid kaleidoscope of blues and grays, signaling an imminent fate. This is no longer a noble duel of aristocrats, but a brutal fight where the strongest survive. His gaze, full of impotent rage, is directed into the void, climbing up to the non-external Disiel. But suddenly, from the very heart of the destroyed arena, like a phoenix from the ashes, Disiela appears. Her gaze, now crimson and piercing, radiates such power that the air around her begins to tremble. That look, he'd seen it before. It held the same unflappable calm that Derek had when faced with mortal danger. In Derek's head, all the details come together to form a single, ominous picture. Disiela could not have been the initiator of such a daring plan, which was backed by someone else, someone much more cold-blooded. And here he is, the chief conductor of this chaos, holding his cloak with an imperturbable look. The cloak flies firmly, revealing its form, and sharp chunks of ice rise up around it. Well, he chuckles to himself, I'll play along with you in this play. A new act of this performance begins, where everyone plays their role. He takes his place among the crystalline blocks, before the eyes of silent observers. The hall was filled with horror and bewilderment. Disiela had disappeared under the rubble, right into the heart of a deadly dust storm. What are you doing? Stop that fighter, one of the spectators shouts, but her calls are drowned out by the judge's indifference. He just raises an eyebrow thoughtfully, to increase the intrigue. Meanwhile, beneath the destroyed platform, among the rubble and ice, Disiela rises. Her eyes, now a deep blue, burn with fierce determination despite the wounds. The enemy is faced with a surge of new energy. His own forces are beginning to tune in. And now he is already turning away from another ice spike released by Dizela. She's aiming for my legs every time I try to start a spell, he realizes. But I can't lose like this. A cold pot is pressing on his forehead. This battle requires the utmost power. In the middle of a torn field, he looks up, preparing for his next move. She noticed a sudden lull, a deceptive calm in the magical storm. Her eyes narrow, burning with determination, ready to seize any opportunity. Even the devoted butler, far from the grasp, thought about the change in the magical flow. His payment is quite affordable. But Reg isn't just thinking, he's already on the move, climbing the mast, challenging the impossible. With effort, he reaches the very top, a daring and dangerous maneuver. From this height, he knows he doesn't need to explain his mana affinity to the enemy, but casting the spell seems completely out of reach. However, Reg is a man of desperate measures, and the essence, a radical idea, flares up within him. Pure, raw mana erupts from his palm, a bright azure spear of power. He aims not into the distance, but into the light itself below him, a reckless display of power. The white-haired opponent, well educated, registers a sudden, localized surge. The mast partially breaks apart from the impact, and tree fragments can explode. The part he was holding on to a moment ago breaks, falling down into the abyss. Reg himself falls, caught in the chaos of his own creation, a controlled descent into danger. The shattered mast hits the ground with a deafening roar, raising a cloud of dust. A scream of sound escapes from someone watching the devastating spectacle, their heart clenching in fear. But Reg lands with a practiced roll, dust swirling around his figure like a ghostly cloak. He coughs, clears the air, his gaze already fixed on the enemy through the settling dust, and a surprisingly quick move creates another powerful mana copy. However, it is not meant to destroy the earth. It is a deadly world aimed precisely at Bat. Melissa, caught off guard by his unorthodox maneuver, barely has time to react, her eyes wide with sudden realization. Suddenly, her hand shoots up, instinctively trying to intercept the attack until something akin to panic flashes in her eyes. But the atmosphere, enveloped in a blinding blue light, does not become too fast to be stopped. It pierces the air, leaving behind only a shimmering trail. Melissa, her face flushed with tension, makes a split-second decision. Without thinking, she rushes forward like a red flash, straight into the high beam. His eyes, burning with determination, watch her every move carefully. The next moment, Melissa delivers a powerful blow, hitting the target accurately. A furious, meaningful expression, filled with despair, was frozen on her face. The protagonist flies back, his body arching in pain and a look of amazement on his face. The blow was crushing, shaking his entire being. He clutches his chest, breathing raggedly, trying to ease the throbbing pain. Falling to one knee, he clings to the ground, gathering the last of his strength. Melissa, not giving him time to recover, continues her attack, her blonde hair flying in a whirlwind of movement. He reflexively shields his face as small particles of earth fly at him, stirring it up with his movements. Looking up, he sees her determination, and a silent question flashes in his eyes, her fortitude. "You kick and throw sand," someone's words echoed, referring to him. "She does the best she can when the mana is gone." He rises slowly, turning his back to the girl, a new understanding evident in his posture. This fight, this confrontation, was more than just a duel, it was a test of herself. "I'll give you the same, Melissa, and I'll give it my all, just like your brother," he rings silently, his gaze filled with determination and a new, deep connection. And so they stand facing each other, exhausted but unwavering, under the sky, heralding a new stage of their conquest. Despite the pain and the sunset, Diesel gathers her last strength, her gaze becomes piercing, sharpened to the limit. A drop of scarlet blood escapes from her lips, but does not darken her resolve, only the price she has prepared. A brother's old admonition comes flooding back into my mind. "Think of it as brushstrokes, like brushes on a painting," whispers a voice from the past. Like dipping a brush into bright red paint, she dives into memories, finding in them the key to her true power. "There he is, brother," pointing to the boundless sky, where a blue light flickers, the pure embodiment of magic. His eyes reflect understanding, the words spoken then, still echoing, "This is." And there is Magickeys, the childish, amazed whisper of young Diesel, who had discovered a miracle for the first time, lingers in the memory. Under the starry sky that night, a promise was born, an invisible bond that now stretches through years and pain. Behind the eyes, Diesel breathes in this memory, and blue energy, a pulsating light, begins to gather around it. She looks up, and the space around her flares with a bright, pure flame. Her hair and robes are enveloped in magical light. The hand, slightly trembling with tension, stretches forward, forming streams. Every finger, every nerve is filled with radiance, and invisible sparks swirl into a whirlwind. Her eyes, previously dull from exhaustion, now burn with a blinding sky-blue fire of determination. And now, before everyone, she stands, as if reborn, with a spear of ice in her hands, surrounded by an aura of primordial power. Horror and amazement emerge among the manifestations. This level of power causes shock. Darling, Diesel, she's using the magic of the first star," one woman whispers barely audibly, her voice shaking with shock. "Ice spears, so you did it, Zella," he, her brother, silently admits, his gaze sharpening. Diesel, with icy determination in his eyes, channels his newfound power, preparing for another strike. He responds in kind, his hand reaching out to gather his own food in response to the challenge. But that doesn't change anything, he declares silently, his face twisting into a grimace of stern determination as the battle continues. He thought he held the advantage, even though he knew Dila was powerful, and that confidence only strengthened his resolve. In his eyes burns the flame of unwavering will. He will wound first, get ahead of fate, and, with one blow, snatch victory from the clutches of inevitability. But Dila, not flinching under his pressure, merely presses her lips together, preparing to answer this challenge with the same furious force that boils within her. Her hand glows with a ghostly light, calling upon the very essence of magic to form a weapon against the imminent threat. In response, he himself rushes forward, and from his outstretched palm, dozens of deadly arrows woven from pure energy burst forth, raining down on the enemy. Among them, one stands out. The brightest, the sharpest, an arrow, having absorbed all its power, rushes straight to the target, piercing space. The audience freezes, their faces contorted in horror as a cry of despair escapes from the chest of the old lady, seeing the imminent danger for Diela. A powerful blow shakes the ground, raising clouds of dust, and at the very heart of the explosion, only a pulsating clot of magical energy remains. The clot of this, just a moment ago full of power, with a crack, shows that myriad sparks, its power dissipates in space, leaving only an insignificant echo. And so he, suffocated from the tension, sank down, feeling every nerve of his being, testing the limits of his capabilities. And she stands, but only for a moment, and the blood streaming down her temple silently testifies to the severity of the blow received. The third observer, his eyes burning red, records the outcome of the war with cold detachment, his gaze piercing and merciless. But suddenly, the veil of time is torn apart, and we are transported back a whole year to the days when peace and serenity reigned over the world. The sun's rays caress the branches of an old tree, where a caring bird feeds its chicks, and in the distance the last facade of the estate is visible. At this quiet hour of the morning, a letter arrives at the Duplin estate, news of a disruption to the usual way of life. The servant respectfully reports to his master, "A letter, sir, about an upcoming reception. What should I do with it?" And in a deep room, by the window, a girl sits alone, a tiny figure in a vast world, the intrigue of adults, locked in her silence. Her gaze is directed into the distance, and in it one can read the shadow of an old sadness, as if she has a premonition of new trials that await her ahead. The owner of the estate is thoughtfully silent. His face does not reflect a single emotion, but the weight of the decision made is visible in his eyes. And once again we return to the present, where Dila, bloodied but unbroken, looks up and looks at her, unwavering determination to continue negotiations no matter what. An azure light flares around Dila, erecting a final, desperate barrier. Her voice, full of pain and strength, confirmed, "The protection is on, but at what cost?" Her protector, a man in uniform, drops to one knee, his face filled with alarm. And outside, with the same pain in his red eyes, young Alf watches this. His gaze will open, as if he has already cried over an outcome he is unable to change. Daila's screams burst from her chest, tearing apart the silence, a cry for unfulfilled hopes. From the side, the master himself looks on at this madness, frozen in his chair like a statue. His stern face betrays no emotion, while the woman next to him stands frozen in horror. Diela, beaten and dirty, tries in vain to wipe away her tears, but the pain does not subside. The owner ponders, could this teacher really have taught the young lady Duplain something similar? He remembers another Duplain, Raymond, who proudly swore allegiance on the Chosen One's field. His mentor at the time noted the burning ambitions of the youth, seeing a future in them. Those eyes, full of indomitable will, promised great achievements, for which Raymond only thanked. But now, Dila's eyes reflect only a broken future and the bitterness of betrayal. The owner looks at her with almost undisguised condemnation, his gaze heavy and cold. The bustling maids rush at the lady, their voices completely absorbed in her condition. "You need immediate help," they exclaim, trying to console and support. But Dila pulls away abruptly, her touch burning like a warning. She stands up, shaking off someone else's care, and her gaze is directed forward again at the man. He, as if reading the unspoken, only awkwardly pronounces a half-forgotten address. The man tries to find the words, but his praise only slightly upsets, causing the heroine to look straight ahead. The servant, noticing her condition, hurries to help, but in her voice one can hear only sympathy, not relief. Turning away from everyone, she tries to cover her trembling lips, as if this could stop the rising tide of despair. Her legs carry her towards the one who seemed to be her rival, but became an involuntary witness. His gaze, cold and penetrating, is fixed on her, reading every unspoken thought. And there they were, the tears she had tried so hard to hold back, treacherously spilling into her eyes. A caustic bitterness, mixed with resentment, burns her throat, and she helplessly covers her face. These changes, snatched in a whisper, sound like a sentence, final and merciless. And through a veil of tears, she squeezes out an apology. But for what? For her weakness? For her failure? There is no condemnation in his scarlet eyes, no deep understanding and peace. He rises slowly, his figure taking on a determination that she so sorely lacks. A hand falls on her shoulder, a light touch promising support, and the words sound like balm to her wounded soul. A smile touches his lips, and there is an instruction in his voice that goes beyond mere consolation. Something new lights up in her eyes, a flash of hope through despair. And this gesture, involuntary, desperate, becomes a silent cry, full of pain and gratitude. But this intimate moment is illuminated by a worried look that breaks the silence. Heavy footsteps on the stone tiles announce the approach of another figure. This figure appears to be a woman, whose face expresses anxiety and whose voice sounds like a mother's pain. The mother's embrace, strong and comforting, takes her into its protection, washing away the remnants of bitterness. And words of comfort, read through our tears, promise that now everything will be fine. The mother, despite her tears, insistently asks her daughter to take care of her wounds, and she, with a trembling voice, agrees. She watches the retreating figures of her daughter and her maids, a storm of emotions reigning in her soul. Tears stream down her cheeks, but behind them comes not only bitterness, but also a cold, steely determination. At the same time, the stranger in the dark cloak slowly moves away, his silhouette dissolving into the bright day. But his departure is interrupted by a firm and decisive step from a woman who is not going to allow what happened to go unpunished. He turns around, taken aback by her presence, and a silent question appears in his scarlet eyes. The mother, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, attacks him, accusing him of vulgarity and a complete lack of understanding of his actions. A faint glow emanates around the stranger as he bows his head and takes on the searing barrage of accusations. She brands him for cheap tricks that have tarnished the purity of the noble lily, accusing him of dirty, vulgar, and indecent deeds. And suddenly, there is a deafening sound of a slap, shaking the air and the silence between them. Her gaze still blazes with uncontrollable anger, which knows neither boundaries nor regrets. Her voice sounds like a scream, demanding the manifestation of dignity and the protection of those very values that, in her opinion, he trampled. The man, her husband, appears out of nowhere, trying to hold his wife as she continues to denounce what happened. The bloody splashes, like bright brushstrokes, speak eloquently of the brutality of this episode. But suddenly, the flame of her anger turns to shock as she realizes the true nature of what has happened. The Duke, with restraint, but with unwavering firmness, points out to her the sincerity of the vulgarity in this situation. She, still in confusion, tries to justify her actions by referring to the stranger's lower level. He confirmed her words about the insignificance of its consequences, but there was a deep, deep meaning in his voice. And then, changing his tone, he utters the key words that turn everything upside down: he is their daughter's teacher. His rhetorical question hangs in the air like a hammer, breaking her arrogance and making her think. The man, seeing his son's confusion, asks for forgiveness for his mother, explaining her behavior as a peculiar, albeit harsh, parental love. The boy's eyes show confusion, but also a subtle hint of understanding of this ancient family drama. The young man replies that everything is fine, and the father, now calmer, suggests moving to the reception area for a serious conversation, away from view. The three leave, about forcing the woman alone with her shock, confusion, and chest rupture, resentment. Her face is a mixture of anger, disbelief, and humiliation. The world she knew is crumbling. Meanwhile, in the quiet of the office, a pen plunges into the inkwell with a soft rustle, foreshadowing a fateful decision. The man at the table, with a stony expression on his face, acknowledges the teacher's undeniable merits in raising his daughter, promising a worthy reward for this. And then, without beating around the bush, he offers the young man something unattainable for commoners: to master the magic of the third star. The young man freezes, his heart skips a beat from such a bold, incredible proposal. A flame of long-hidden and carefully guarded ambition flares up for a moment in his scarlet eyes. The scene freezes, two silhouettes, turned towards the light from the father's window, decide the fate of not only Diela, but, perhaps, the entire world. A firm answer leaves his lips, echoing around the room. Yes, he craves this power. In an instant, the dramatic intensity faded, giving way to a light, almost festive air, as if a promise of a new beginning. Returning again to a stern tone, the monument recalls his achievements but emphasizes their relative insignificance in Ebelstein society. He casually remarks that Duplin is full of people who are capable of giving the young lady a gift. The boy, as if immersed in his own thoughts, replies that Diella will now quickly make up for lost time, having caught the confidence. But the Duke, looking him straight in the eye, declares that his daughter needs more than just an instructor to hone her skills. She needs a teacher with capital letters, who is able to lead her and open new horizons. Again, the same movement of the pen, but now it seems even more significant, almost ritualistic, securing fate. The Duke bluntly states how offensive his ambitions are to the haughty nobles, but then relents, admitting he's willing to overlook it, just for him. The young man responds without a word, merely silently realizing the hero has already discerned his true aspirations, which extend far beyond the third star to magic of the fourth tier and beyond. The Duke, who seemed to see right through him, warned that if he had chosen the path of arguments for a penchant for the ordinary, this place would not hold him. He asked a shrewd question that hung in the air, as if he had been expecting his friend to reveal the truth long ago. The young man confirmed his readiness without any dynamics, and the Duke, with an understanding smile, merely admonished the change by devoting a little more time to training the younger Diella. The Duke's words about the highest sphere accessible to the common people allowed the young people to flare up, reflecting their hidden desires. The Duke said softly but confidently, responding to what he had already read in his gaze, "You are striving for the magic of the third star, aren't you?" The world around him seemed to stand still as the young man processed what he had heard, unable to hide his shock. But then, with firm determination, he uttered just two words that sounded like a vow, "Yes, I want to." And so, the gates swung open. They entered the world of the unknown, filling everything around with dazzling light. Step by step, the young man entered the vast university network, where the air was filled with the scent of ancient wisdom and magic. His hand reached out to the ancient, massive object, as if fate itself had ordered it. With a slight rustle of the binding, the book opened, revealing intricate symbols and runes full of unknown power. His scarlet eyes reflected a deep integrity as he took in every line, every sign. The impression was stunning, because a whole world of knowledge, previously accessible, opened up before him. He knew that many mages desperately search for even one book of spells of the second star in their entire lives. But here, in the ducal treasury, the shelves were bursting with priceless tomes of third star spells. With each page he read, his determination only grew stronger, and his thirst for knowledge became insatiable. Meanwhile, in the world beyond the library walls, ignorance and everyday worries continued their course, while a young man in a tavern was discussing something, and his companion listened in bewilderment. The doves soared into the serene blue sky, symbolizing peace and tranquility, broken only by the rustle of their wings. Little Diella, with an air of importance, announced with her low, light, and modest delivery, "She is now a first-star mage." He chuckled slightly and acknowledged his title, as even one successfully used first-level magic trick gave him the right to be called a magician. Her face showed indignation. How could one be so indifferent to a student's success, even if it was modest? She showed it, recognizing that the path to greatness is not easy, and he, watching her, noticed how my liveliness had returned to her over these 3 days. With a slight smile, he reminded her of the days when it seemed her tears would never end. Her cheeks turned pink with indignation, and the words about dust only gave her away. How naive she was to think that he would be expelled, and how much she suffered from not knowing the truth. Putting the memories aside, he offered to begin the lesson, praising her for her rapid progress in mastering magic. These words lit sparks of surprise and hope in her eyes. She asks again with disbelief, trying to grasp the meaning of his compliment. He explained that few people can so quickly demonstrate their gift and possess the first star, to which Diella proudly declared that she was true to her word. Now that her ambitions had been fueled, she began to think about new spells, recalling the magic arrow and the wind blade, which looked powerful in Raig's hands, or perhaps ice spear, which she could even use to tease him, but her reverie was interrupted by Raig's stern voice. Shocked by this turn of events, she did not understand why she would be deprived of the promised spells. He explained that the commissions were reasonable, but the main thing was a solid foundation of the magical art. The whole point, he said, came down to mana, and Diella, resigned, was ready to begin her studies. A bitter disappointment flashed in her eyes. She had rejoiced in vain, waiting for the mastery of combat spells. Her lips pursed, betraying her resentment at the injustice. Noticing his intense gaze, she innocently wondered if her face was dirty. He smiled slightly and admitted that he had just surprised her with his unexpected submission. But this wording again hurt her pride, and Diella Gordo stated that she always listened to his wise words. Then she, with a sly smile, splashed a bucket of water on his head, reminding him of the past. He, unperturbed, reminded her how he had already accidentally received this tribute from her in the form of dirty water. The girl was surprised that he still remembered that incident, to which he replied that it was impossible to forget something like that. A loud, infectious laugh filled the air as he exclaimed that the weather was absolutely magnificent today. She, with complete sincerity, suggested that we immediately begin practicing the manifestation of magic, because that's true. His eyes sparkled with mischief, and he explained that magic really was incredibly fun. Days turned to nights, and under the light of the full moon, the ancient castle kept their secrets. The practice was in full swing, but even the tidal magical power could not hide its growing shadow. He glanced at her and casually remarked that, according to rumors, Dila would soon be even busier. She started, surprised that this news had already reached his ears. The girl admitted that she doesn't know what to do, because starting next week, boring etiquette lessons and a good education await her. But he smiled slightly, asking, "Isn't it wonderful now, having mastered magic?" She received a true noble upbringing. Listing the endless list of disciplined people, Dila exclaimed in despair that she saw no point in all the unnecessary cramming. A look of genuine amazement crossed her face. How could Princess Eiling have endured such training? He explained that it was because of this that Iceland became the flower of Duplin, the center of all Evelstein high society. Dila just wanted to continue studying magic, to which he simply replied, "Then study." He assured them that their lordship had hired him and given them enough freedom, but Diela doubted that they would have enough time for magic. With an unperturbed look, he asked who would dare to throw him out now. She smiled slyly, reminding him that although his father had accepted him, his mother, the Duchess, would not give in so easily. He asked why Madame was so eager to expel her, and Diela, embarrassed, explained she was afraid that Diela, having studied with him, was losing her noble dignity and becoming like a mercenary. He merely remained silent, agreeing that their sparring today had indeed lacked the grace typical of nobles. But then, with a barely noticeable grin, they threw out something similar, mere trifles, which caused bewilderment in Deal. His scarlet eyes turned to the side. "Lady Diela, it's better for Madame to keep quiet. It's not as difficult as you think. We just need to take away her excuse," he added, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. Diela raised her eyebrows, not fully understanding the meaning of these mysterious words. Meanwhile, in the Duke's last mansion, bathed in the morning sun, a prim life of its own reigned. The Duchess, Diela's mother, stood among the servants, her face reflecting deep anxiety. Before her mind's eye, she once again saw that impudent mercenary, destroying everything she had taught her daughter, and her heart sank with pain for the poor little one. I could see him grinning evilly, shouting, "Look, Diela, this is the true path of a mercenary." And her Diela, instead of maintaining her dignity, nodded obediently, forgetting about her things in the Parliament of Light. In the next vision, the daughter was already bursting into the living room, throwing a wild boar over her shoulder, and with a mad laugh, challenging their vaunted conference society of Ebelstein. The guests screamed in horror, recognizing in this savage woman Lady Diela Catherine Duplain. Diela laughed in her nightmares. The Duchess, pressing her palm to her temple, felt only a growing headache from these dark premonitions. "Yes, what can this worthless thing teach Diela?" she whispered to herself, looking at the fussing servant, who did not notice her suffering. Her face twisted into a grimace of pain and despair. "Even if my husband confessed to him, I am the mistress of this estate." Her voice grew stronger, but then someone's voice called out to her, "Mother?" She started and turned around when she saw her daughter, and her stern expression instantly softened. The Duchess's face lit up with a gentle, almost mournful smile, as if she saw before her not an adult girl, but a small, defenseless baby. A single tear rolled down her cheek, expressing all her complex, contradictory feelings. And, for a moment, her gaze became detached, directed somewhere into the distance, as if she was looking for an answer to the questions that tormented her. She was brought out of her reverie by a polite but ringing voice asking for a night's rest. The lady's gaze froze in slight bewilderment, and she was unable to fully prepare for an answer. Disella, with a flawless smile, was called upon by the forced solitude behind the mist gazebos. There was something unspoken in the air, but a wall of obligation seemed to have risen between them. The old lady, having caught the silent refusal, only slightly flashed a shadow of disappointment in her eyes, and the young lady hastily left, citing a tight, pre-planned schedule. But her mother still tried to hold her back, carefully asking about the beginning of lessons in nobility. Disella turned around, her face a mask of perfect politeness. She waited impatiently, said that she had been looking forward to these classes, thanked him for his concern, but still left. "Then go, hurry!" Her mother let go with a slight sigh, realizing the pointlessness of continuing. Dicella glided into the courtyard like a ghostly shadow, voicing only the echo of polite words. At that moment, judging by an invisible signal, a pile of dry leaves scattered from the hands of one of the employees. A gentle smile lit up Dicella's face as she turned around, expressing sympathy and unexpected kindness. The frightened maid only whispered her name silently, amazed by this instant attention. Meanwhile, slowly and with dignity, the figure of the elder lady retreated into the depths of the mansion. Dicella kept her path, her every step marked by an invisible determination. Meanwhile, in the noble quarter of Ebelstein, in the Rose Salon, joyful laughter did not cease. One of the ladies with the invitation recalled a previous meeting where Lady Eiling had seemed so depressed. "Oh, really?" Aisling replied, covering her lips, a subtle play in her eyes. And with a charming smile, she announced that all the sounds were behind her. Her soul had found peace again. Lady Elente, with such alarm, admitted that the news of the rescue of one of the representatives of the aristocratic quarter horrified her. Before us stood Elente Alfione Belmiard, the second daughter of the family home, whose smile hid many unspoken thoughts. Eileen, in turn, thanked him for his attention, explaining that she had to personally oversee the search for a magic teacher for her younger sister, Dizelle. A look of surprise mixed with suspicion flashed in Elente's eyes. The teacher's personal requests for Diesel sounded unusual. With a small but insightful smile, Elente wondered who was this incredible teacher for whom Aislinn had personally approached the Duplain house. The fair-haired Lady Denise Lindber Veltus, daughter of the House of Veltus, asked in amazement whether it was really Diesel, the younger sister, who was being referred to. She said that she had recently seen Dizella and was amazed by her transformation. From a mischievous girl she had turned into a true lady. Moreover, Dizella demonstrated the magic of a first star and held herself so restrained that even Denise felt a surge of desire to improve herself. However, Denise's thoughts were already racing in a different direction. How strange that Aisling herself had spoken about the sister whom the Duplains had so carefully hidden. Still, having pulled herself together, Denise beamed at Aisling, congratulating her on finding such an outstanding mentor. Aisling confirmed that, although the teacher had no discernible circumstance, his exceptional abilities justified a personal journey to Bedlam's students. The words mercenary echoed in Elente's wake, and Denise's face only frowned slightly at her notes at that moment. Clutching the cup in her hand, Elente turned into memories. That same Diesel, was it because of her quirk that the cook ran away from the Dublin house? The thought of this cook, who had never run away, and his naive belief in Elente's kindness left her with only slight bewilderment. Taking a sip of tea, Elenta continued to reflect on the wonderful teacher who not only managed to re-educate the notorious rude girl, but also revealed the magic of the first stars in her. A barely perceptible, predatory smile played across her face. Elente approached Aislinn with a question, wanting to know the name of the mysterious magic teacher, to which she only asked again in bewilderment. Elente explained her interest. Dizella's teacher was eventually achieving great fame, and she would like to be among the first to know his name. With a soft smile, Eiling said the name that would one day thunder throughout the world, Derek. It turned out that Derek not only raised her sister, but was also her accomplished etiquette teacher, his lessons so valuable in this complex world. I see. How commendable that you're learning on your own. Lady Dicella smiled and praised Aislinn, though Aislinn immediately corrected her. Dare had taught her everything. With a sweet smile, Eiling admitted that everything had been difficult, but thanks to Derek she could do a lot now. And again, like an ominous echo, Derek's name flashed through Diesel's thoughts, multiplying to the point of madness. Anger overwhelmed Diesel, because the cursed word sounded too often, too loudly. It is unknown what Derek did to Aislinn, but Diesel couldn't leave it like that, feeling the need to act. Meanwhile, the servants, among whom was the young maid, were whispering about the incredible change in Lady Diesel, that she had become so kind and gentle. Even the old palace was surprised by her good mood, so unusual for her just a few weeks ago. But one observant gentleman in a monocle found these changes suspicious, since such nobility had previously only been possessed by Eiling, and despite the outward decorum, he felt a hidden malice frozen on Lady Dizelle's face. It seemed that the mask of nobility concealed something else. At the same time, under the cover of the starry night, somewhere in the distance, a real drama was unfolding. An ancient tome, glowing with magical light, lying on the grass, a seemingly forgotten but powerful artifact. The young man in the evaporator summoned a secret power, enveloped in blue flame. His eyes glowed red, and determination was evident in every movement as energy bubbled around him. A groan escaped through clenched teeth, betraying the inhuman substance with which he fought the elements. Blue fire formed in his palm, ready to crash down in a crushing wave. But suddenly his strength left him, and he collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily, surrounded by a cool chill. and then a voice rang out, full of apologies, asking if he had disturbed the training. Derek stood before him, smiling and casual, as if he had come out of nowhere. The young man, confused, could only squeeze out a question about what brought his teacher here at such a late hour. Good, but accepted everywhere and in health. The night sky scattered diamonds of stars, listening to unspoken thoughts. The teacher, without wasting any time, announced the reason for his visit, a conversation about Lady Dissel. But the young man's gaze caught the book in the student's hands, and he could not resist asking about the knowledge in her rare magical manual. The student confirmed that it was indeed an ancient grimoire lent to him by his lordship himself. The young man explained that the level of spells was beyond his capabilities yet, but he was studying the book in advance. The teacher listened attentively, and then, with an expression of deep thought, uttered the prophetic words, "He is a true magician." The young mentor seemed amazed by the professor's impressive intuition. Returning to the original topic, he asked what exactly the teacher wanted to discuss regarding Lady Diesel. And then it turned out that the reason for the visit was not so serious. The teacher, embarrassed, was trying to understand the tastes of the young ladies. The student looked at him with undisguised bewilderment, his red eyes expressing a complete lack of understanding. Overcoming her embarrassment, the teacher asked a shocking question about the doll that would have pleased Lady Diesel. The image of a creepy rag doll immediately appeared before the young man's eyes, and he categorically replied, "No way." His tone was firm, his gaze like ice, leaving no room for objections. The mentor hastily agreed, pretending that it was only a hypothetical thought, and the student echoed that it was indeed a bad idea. Having finished this strange conversation, he suggested that the young men stop their training and return to the estate. The two of them went to read, looking around the night forest behind them. In parting, the young man expressed his sincere gratitude to his mentor for the time and attention he devoted to him. The teacher noted with a smile that the atmosphere in their house had become much more pleasant. Even Valerian had taken up his duties, and the Duke, although he was hiding it, was pleased. He noted that the Duke's feelings were difficult to understand, but everyone in the mansion agreed that he was pleased with the changes. And every step took them further from the silence of the night forest, agreeing to a new day of care. The Duke, looking into the bottomless night sky, realized that it was time for him to accept the inevitable time. People are capable of change, especially children, and if Dissela found his way, then he too cannot avoid this transformation. He approached Derek with his invisible hand, which led to these changes. Derek, in turn, accepted the gratitude for the praise, as if answering an unspoken call. Something ancient flashed in his eyes, piercing and red, as the night covered them with its mystery. Suddenly, the Duke broke the silence, noticing a very noticeable change in Dissela's magic, as if she had acquired a new style. Derek confirmed his guess by comparing it to the art of an artist, adding that only true talent reveals such subtleties. It turned out that Lady Dissela had mastered the School of Wildlife's mana management technique, which Derek had heard about. Every wizard is unique in their mana charge, and Diesel, as Derek explained, will soon not need anyone's help. At this level, the teacher's intervention could only become a hindrance, and the teacher took this with understanding. Under the starry sky, they both realized that sooner or later, Diesel's time would come to shine in full force. 2 months flew by unnoticed, as if petals carried by the spring wind, bringing with them changes. Dissela, greeting the morning with a smile, offered the maid to dye her hair with fresh, just-picked flowers. The scent of flowers filled the air, and it seemed that this spring had lasted not just one season, but entire months of happiness. She takes pride in her success in magic, in her new, unusual relationship with servants, which has become a family for her. Laughing, Dissela realized how much she had lost in the past, and all her joy was, in her opinion, due to Derek. The maid noticed an unusual radiance in the young lady's eyes, guessing that today must be the day of the magic lesson. Then Dissela decided that she would definitely give one of the most beautiful flowers to Derek, weaving it into an elegant composition. Petals, painted with the delicate edges of dawn, fluttered in the light breeze, promising a bright future. But suddenly, apparently from an unnoticed blow, the promises crumpled, foreshadowing an imminent storm. Her world shattered into 1,000 pieces, reflected in her long, terrified eyes. Tears stung her eyes as she thought about clinging to the slippery hope, calling out Derek's name. But the answer was cold and merciless, like an icy blade piercing her heart. As if cutting a thread, Derek spoke the words that would change their fate forever. Just as there is no eternal spring and eternal winter, everything has its time, and every feeling has its time. Wise Ron had long anticipated this moment as a sign of his daughter's wild, unbridled nature. He understands that any further intervention will only deprive her of her freedom and break her delicate wings. The head of the house, sighing heavily, confirmed what they both already knew. There was no longer room for Derek here. A bitter silence hung in the air, as if unspoken words filled with regret. The Lord rose up. His gaze was heavy, but in it were thoughts of both sadness and inevitability. His voice cracked as he expressed his gratitude for Derek helping his daughter become stronger. The admission of his own paternal impotence was a bitter revelation, but it brought relief. However, even this frankness did not soften the sharp tone of the question about the upcoming separation. Derek bowed his head and quietly announced his plans, the new road that lay ahead. But the Lord, not allowing him to finish, demanded a symbolic return of their shared past, the key from the library. Derek tried to maintain his dignity and hand over the key through the palace, but they didn't listen to him. The Lord's adamance was final. The key must be returned immediately, without delay. There was no protest or despair in Derek's eyes, only a deep, almost humble understanding. The Lord's last words closed the door to the past, to this chapter of his life, forever. He stood up without looking back, leaving behind fragments of hope and promises that never came true. He leaves, his footsteps echoing loudly in the spacious hall, leaving behind only the echo of farewell. Her voice, full of pain and bewilderment, breaks the silence. You came from nowhere, and you leave the same way. He says his name, but without a shadow of the former warmth, as if distancing himself from everything that was. The girl understands that nothing can be changed lately, but she desperately wants to say a word. With a trembling voice, she asks a question that contains her entire plea. In response, there is only a heavy, impenetrable silence, which speaks louder than any words. He takes a step, then another, as if trying to quickly break the invisible threads that bind them. He talks about returning to his old life, about a future that awaits her but not him. The last spark of hope fades in her eyes, replaced by the understanding of inevitability. And only some time later, perhaps, will their paths cross again, he promises with a slight grin. But for her, these words are just a cruel mockery of her feelings. Night fell upon the castle, hiding unspoken words and broken connections in its shadows. Dila tossed and turned in her bed, caught in a nightmare that wouldn't let her go even in her sleep. Ominous voices whispered in her ears, accusing her of uselessness, of worthlessness. She dreamed of images from the past, where every reproach echoed with a sharp pain in her heart. Words that carry a stigma have haunted her since her earliest years. She opens her eyes in horror, trying to escape from the phantoms of the past. A sharp voice, a scream stuck in the throat, and a cold pot on the forehead. She sits on the bed, breathing heavily, trying to realize that all of this was just a dream. Nightmare, she whispered, trying to drive away the last shadows of the night's terror. She had barely had time to exhale when the door swung open and an alarmed maid appeared on the threshold, shouting her name. Her worried gaze led Lady, and in it was read the question of what had happened, about the scream that broke the silence. A familiar thought sounded attentively in her blue eyes, but now with a completely new meaning. In the blink of an eye, Diela saw before her an uncaring servant, her past self, cruel, insidious, capable of any meanness. This memory, like a ghost, reminded her of her past mistakes, of what she was like. The maid's persistent questions pulled her out of the whirlwind of thoughts, demanding an answer. She winced, slowly looking up, and here a decisive response is applied, a completely new awareness. Lady Diela smiled, truly for the first time, realizing that her previous methods had never led her to true values. The days passed, filled with new decisions and fresh, changing winds that blew over the last mansion. Meanwhile, one of the estate's inhabitants, a young man with eyes, was preparing to leave, discussing details with the accompanying unusualness. Lady Diela, standing nearby, sent him off with a gentle smile, knowing that the time for farewells was fleeting. He lowered his gaze, as if weighing in his soul the weight of our past days. The assembled inhabitants of the mansion provoked him, each time following their feelings. Grown men, expressing regret, thought about his departure, that he had tested the need to return to the roots. He wished him luck and offered support, acknowledging the difficulties he had faced in the house. He thanked her, and there was genuine appreciation in his voice. But then his gaze fell on someone, and a spark of something unspoken flashed in the scarlet eyes. Lady Diela, standing nearby, felt this gaze, and a silent question froze in her blue eyes. The tension increased until she couldn't stand it any longer and demanded attention from that intense, almost burning gaze. Without looking away, she threw harsh words into his face, declaring her independence, that the times of begging were over. His smile was a farewell, full of bitter wisdom, but in his intelligent soul he hoped that a grain of his knowledge would remain with her. She responded with laughter, promising not to forget their roots, and reminded him that by becoming her mentor, he had forever linked his fate to her growing fame. A shadow of understanding flashed in his scarlet eyes, as if he had already seen the difficult road that awaited them both. For a moment, her face expressed anxiety, a premonition of inevitable changes. She quickly gave parting words, full of tenderness and a hidden atmosphere, and he calmly wrapped her up, asking, and she did not forget about herself. Diella, with feigned seriousness, once again declared her maturity, convincing not only him, but herself as well. In response, her youthful ardor found an echo in his confident, almost arrogant gaze. He repeated it like a mantra, demonstrating not only outward calm but also inner determination. But suddenly, as if from nowhere, a female figure appeared, tenderly pondering him. Her voice, a gentle whisper, spoke his name, and then a cryptic warning addressed only to him. He only bowed his head silently, understanding the words that could be fatal. The woman next to him turned to Diella, and her voice said, "Lady Diella," with unexpected seriousness. The next moment, the ground seemed to disappear from under his feet as Derek, pale, sank to his knees. Through the pain, he muttered one last thing, as if an admonition, that she should not grow up so early and bear this burden. Tears welled up in her eyes, anger and despair appeared on her childish face, as if the world was falling apart. She turned back abruptly, unable to bear to watch the heartbreaking moment any longer as Derek was loaded into the carriage. But his gaze still followed her, as if he had conveyed a final silent message, and her scream came forth. Through tears, clenching her fists, she raised her hand, saying goodbye to him, hoping for a future meeting. And as he left, he carried with him her silent vow, hidden behind a farewell wave of his hand. Her bright gaze, washed with tears, held within itself an unshakable hope, like a beacon in a coming storm. And the heavens, serene and distant, silently watched the changing days and nights. Meanwhile, in the bustling shopping district of Ebelstein, life was seething according to its own cruel laws. A sudden, dull thud echoed down the narrow street, heralding the beginning of the drama. A merciless hand fell upon the young man, giving him no chance to resist. The crowd of onlookers, incited by angry cries, demanded even greater cruelty, while in the center stood a cold and indifferent observer. Each blow left not only pain on Derek's face, but also bloody marks washed away by the dust of the street. And only a desperate, terrified cry of "Derek" was able to break through this chaos. But the one who led the massacre only grinned, his crimson eyes shining with pure pleasure. After some time, the walls of the old taverns, Belden's Tier, began to remain, where one could heal wounds and forget. The good-natured owner, like an old friend, handed Derek a mug of tart honey wine, forgetting about the hardships at the expense of the establishment. Pellin, without hiding his curiosity, watched him closely, noticing how his pallor had changed after his noble life. With a slight mockery, she wondered how he became a teacher of magic, and insistently demanded to be told everything that happened. Derek just looked away, his curt words about work and no news sounding like an attempt to hide from the past. "Wow, you're talking like a real nobleman," Pellin teased, not wanting to give in, asking if he would be any the worse for the story. "That's enough, Pellin," her master stopped her gently, while the girl irritably recalled the difficulty of work in his absence. He, with paternal concern, asked whether Derek had been well rewarded for all his efforts, hinting at money. But Derek, replying that he had received something more important than ringing coins, put them both down in anticipation. On the table, like an ancient artifact, lies an antique tome in a burgundy binding with inlay and a mysterious lock. "What is this? Could it really be the Second Star's spellbook?" The owner gasped, and Pellin, amazed, gasped at the unprecedented rarity. The boy, with an unperturbed look, clarified that this was the tome of the Third Star. Everyone's faces stretched out in horror, and the owner croaked that they would all be in trouble for such a theft. But Pellin, suddenly, as if possessed, was fired up with excitement. "I don't care. I want one too. Where was she?" The boy just shrugged indifferently, saying, "The Grand Duke gave it to me." Pellin was so choked with rage and dependence that her question about shooting teachers sounded like a desperate plea. In the silence of the shop, only a candle on the windowsill flickered with a tongue of flame, casting whimsical shadows on the twilight outside the window. Soon, breaking the prolonged silence, the boy asked about new orders, which caused considerable surprise in the owner. He admitted that he thought he had lost his former skill and wanted to return to training immediately. The owner chuckled good-naturedly. "Come on, kid. In our line of work, there's never a shortage of magicians, and there's plenty of work." The boy's eyes sparkled with determination as he declared, "Today I want to start tomorrow, as soon as possible." The next morning greeted them with a radiant sky and a dear, unknown agreement, while the boy was deep in studying the tome. But suddenly the silence of the forest was broken by a predatory roar. A vile goblin jumped out of the thicket, and Pellin pulled her bowstring in horror. The danger had passed, the monster had fallen, pierced by arrows. The boy just stood calmly over it, as if indifferent. Before they could catch their breath, a new threat emerged from the darkness. Giant spiders, and the sword boy burst into an icy glow. After the fight, Pelin was barely able to stand on her feet, exhausted, while the boy sat in the cart calmly reading his book. Night fell upon the forest, covering its sleep near the warm fire, where only the reflections of the flames played on the sleeping faces. But for now, it was deceptive. Under cover, the dark-haired boy announced himself into the clearing, and a blue aura flickered around him. He raised his hands, and the power of magic began to pulse, forming the air around him. An unforgettable, multifaceted crystal appeared in his palms, emitting a dazzling glow and sparks of pure energy. Then came a solar flare, a devastating ejection, and space was illuminated by a flash of pure light. The flash faded in power, leaving only a flickering echo in the air, as if the world itself had run out of steam after the strain. And then, amidst clouds of dust and smoke, he appeared, exhausted but alive, with blood on his fingers, as if every breath he took cost him incredible changes. The ancient book, holding the secrets of the impossible, a witness to accomplished miracles and bitter losses, has closed. Time passed, and the sun's rays played on the sign of the Beldun's Tier Tavern, promising peace and quiet. But soon summer gave way to golden autumn, when the leaves waltzed, heralding the inevitable changes. And then the harsh winter arrived, wrapping the streets in white blankets and the tavern in the cozy glow of fire. The door swung open in the cold, releasing the expected cloudy vapor and letting in cold air, heralding the arrival of unexpected guests. Two people entered, young Derek and his companion, exhausted by the frost, with tired eyes, but with a spark of life that did not go out even in the most severe cold. The tavern owner, a good-natured giant, greeted them with a grin, while the girl, shivering with cold, scolded Derek for his recklessness. He took the bag from Derek, wondering about the price, and they had to pay for their current trophy. Derek gave a short thank you, feeling warmth begin to spread through his veins, the girl next to him looking relieved, coming back to life. The owner, as if anticipating their decline, offered them a well-deserved rest, but immediately added that there was one special assignment for Richter. He described it as an easy and very profitable business, keeping silent only about some of the inconveniences. They were talking about Count Belmyard, a name always associated with greatness, power, and something else. It turns out that the Count is looking for a sparring partner for magical training, or, more simply, a target to hone his skills. Just survive a couple of blows, that's all, the owner said flippantly, as the final gates of the noble estate were already opening before Derek. He has come to terms with his new destiny, but it doesn't matter what trials await him ahead. The old magician and the young witch were already waiting for him, and the girl eagerly asked who her opponent would be today. Hearing that her sparring partner was just a commoner, she was taken aback, not hiding her irritation. The old man, unperturbed, simply assured her that this was part of the training, and the pair would get a decent temperature, so there was no need to worry. Her contemptuous gaze slid over the young man. She had already dubbed the upcoming training a beating of the unfortunate commoner. But the inner voice, albeit reluctantly, acknowledged he was a magician, albeit a first circle one. While she was preparing to step onto the second level, the difference between the worlds was a whole abyss. Meanwhile, the guy, the future whipping boy, was calmly getting himself in order, as if he had no idea of his fate. A sharp cough attracted attention, and his scarlet eyes, full of some hidden power, did not bode well for those who dared to underestimate him. She came closer, crossing her arms over her chest, and, with undisguised arrogance, asked if he was her partner for the day. The boy bowed politely, introducing himself as Derek, and the old mage seemed to barely manage a smile. Elente, she called to herself, and in this case, she called a slightly familiar name, as if she had heard of Derek somewhere before. Well, let's go to the arena, Elente commanded, but then her expression changed. Wait, is he really a mage? He looks so young. She stretched gracefully, preparing herself for the upcoming test, as if anticipating an easy victory. Elente walked gracefully towards the arena, and Derek only watched her silently. So, she began, turning to him, are you offered the basic rules of a magical duel? Yes, I'm familiar with the basic principles, Derek replied calmly, without showing any signs of emotion. Okay, she said. Fight back with all your might. I'll try to finish quickly. Her words were filled with both mockery and absolute confidence. A plan was already flashing in her mind, to throw him out of the arena with a powerful blow, ending the sparring match in the blink of an eye. However, Derek interrupted his thoughts about unexpected problems. Resist with all my might, finally the strong resistance you expect from me? Elente was taken aback, her face expressing complete bewilderment. What kind of absurd question is that? I need to know the level of resistance you expect, Derek explained, so my sparring was your ultimate criterion. The old magician, watching them, smiled faintly, anticipating an interesting spectacle. Elente only grinned, not hiding her irritation and slight superiority. "You talk funny," she finally said, looking at Derek with a haughty smile. She repeated her conditions again, demanding that he make every effort. Derek only silently considered her words, accepting this bold challenge. His gaze filled with determination, and sparks of mysterious energy danced around his hands. Before he began, however, he asked who could change the rules of the game. After all, any battle only had meaning when it served the higher purpose. The only response was a short, haughty laugh. She could not hide her pleasure at his strange but sincere manners, and again her command sounded like an echo, emphasizing her absolute power. Derek merely listened, silently agreeing with her demand. The debt was on top, and he again obeyed, preparing for the unknown. At that moment, Elente rushed forward, releasing a loud stream of blue magic. But even in battle, she could not help but notice his fortitude, almost praise him. The power that was awakening in him was unusual, causing her to even slightly open her mouth in surprise. But Derek didn't wait. He counterattacked, forcing her to sharply dodge. The fire of struggle burned in his scarlet eyes, anticipating the continuation of the fight. He passed by with lightning speed, leaving behind only a trail of pulsating energy. And each new blow from Derek shook the air, holding back the surrounding world of energy links. Elente stopped, a look of shock and displeasure appearing on her face. And Derek, without wasting a second, was already anticipating the next move, preparing for it. Anger washed over Elenta as she realized she had underestimated him, and that was where his true strength lay. Elente, surrounded by a hail of magical arrows, turned gracefully, but their number increased. Every blow he received from the flash of light from her parry only confirmed the relentlessness of his onslaught. Derek, without moving from his place, mercilessly poured more and more streams of energy on her. A shocked expression flashed across Elente's face. Such a simple spell, but such a masterful execution. She stepped back, feeling like she was growing, and each next world was bringing her closer to the limit. Could this really be just a basic spell, and he was so skilled at serving them? Her disbelief was mixed with anxious admiration. The old mentor let out a soft sigh, amazed by the level of magic that was unheard of in ordinary people. All the rumors about Derek, a skilled observer, were revealed to be ominous truth right before his eyes. Elente, gathering her courage, admitted her mistake. She had indeed underestimated him. Now she decided to take action in earnest, releasing the guess of all the power that was hidden inside. A scarlet aura flared around her, and ancient symbols danced in the air, foreshadowing destruction. Derek, instantly reading her intention, realized that she was no longer aiming at him but intended to destroy the entire arena. With a raised hand, Elente summoned heavenly fire, her eyes blazing with determination. Flashing arrows of fire, like a shower, fell from the sky, engulfing everything around. She stood at the center of these storms, the embodiment of the elements, ready to destroy everything in her path. The sky opened up and streams of flaming spears rained down, forming fiery cages around him. Derek seemed to become only calmer, his gaze looking like inevitable death. He knew that there was no way to avoid it, and he just had to take the hit so that nothing would happen. At that moment, a blinding blue barrier flared up around him, a shield born of his will. A barrage of fire engulfed him, but Derek, though he staggered, stood firm, containing Elente's fury. But having withstood the onslaught, he did not hesitate to gather his own mysterious energy. A sharp thought flashed in his scarlet eyes, anticipation or despair, it was unclear. Elente, not giving him time to recover, rushed forward, delivering a crushing blow with an ice spear. Too fast, too close. Derek felt like there was no way out. His back was pressed against an invisible wall. The deadly blade struck him point blank, leaving no chance to dodge or create a barrier. Her pure, unbridled power was truly insane, crushing everything in its path. The next moment, the world exploded in a blinding flash that engulfed all reality. A bright, unbearable light flooded the space, distorting outlines and dissolving shadows. Derek collapsed to the ground, closing his eyes, and only one word could be heard through the veil of pain: "Damn it." But Elente also staggered, stunned by the force of her own blow, as if her eyesight had failed her. Blinded by the light, she tried in vain to find the source, her voice sounding confused. Where did that bastard go? In the thick darkness that had replaced the flash, Elente desperately made her way forward, searching for at least some kind of landmark. Slowly, the light faded, revealing only empty, cold walls around her, but something still bothered her. And then, a cold-blooded guess flashed through her mind. Could it be? Derek, completely purposeful, calmly moved to the side, among the flickering, deceptive sparks. The intangible ice shards he left behind were just part of his evil plan. The realization fell upon Elente with its weight, causing her to shudder in despair. It was not just an illusion, but magic that followed the sounds, calculated down to the smallest detail. The first attack, which seemed to have passed by, now took on a sinister meaning. Everything was staged. Derek stood, calm and unwavering, his eyes shining with triumph and a faint smile playing on his lips. There he is, Derek, attacking again, releasing blinding clots of blue light from his hands. Elente didn't flinch. Her magic had already formed into a counterattack, screaming in her opponent's face, "I will never lose." But there was a sudden illumination in her eyes, a worry that foreshadowed something entirely different. Derek doesn't back away. Instead, he quickly closes the distance, causing Elente to ask questions. Is he really going to rush the closest fighter? An angry thought flashed through her mind. Fool. After all, the speed of my magic is my trump card. Concentrate, Elente, she ordered herself. All it takes is for the magic to appear in his hand, and I will get ahead of him, putting an end to this duel once and for all. And then his foot touches the ground almost weightlessly but with such menace. At that moment, Elente leaps into the air, dodging something that Derek had just released from under his feet. But something went wrong. Her eyes widen in confusion. The sole of her boot, having touched the surface, is now surrounded by a pulsating purple glow. Her body, hovering just a second ago, seems to be a projection of this same ominous aura. His fingertips, she realizes with horror, are radiant magic. Shock mixed with pain falls upon her. A shrill cry of pain erupts from her chest as a wave of magic passes through her entire being. The old master, watching the duel from the sidelines, did not miss a single movement, seeing how Elente was powerlessly slumping. It's impressive, he muttered, thinking. It seems to be from the school of wildness, but its flow is elusive. According to the school's regulations, it's so difficult to keep up with. Elente, out of breath and exhausted, gasps for breath as she looks at her conqueror. You. A surprising smile appeared on her face. A really interesting boy. She looked at him, having dropped her previous arrogance. I'll be honest, at first I looked at you very highly, and I thought you were just a self-praising liar. But what he demonstrated made her reconsider everything. An undisguised curiosity lights up in her eyes, foreshadowing a new round of intrigue. She pulls away abruptly, turning away from the stream of furious energy. His gaze, filled with crimson light, pierces the air, foreshadowing the inevitable. The blow came too close, causing her to flinch in anticipation. He gathers colossal power around himself, preparing for a crushing blow. A violent explosion hides her, throwing her aside with a cry of pain. He soars above the battlefield, a ready-made duel structure. Red pupils focused on the target, leaving no doubt about his determination. A certain agony can be read in every twitching muscle of her face. He froze in the air like a predator preparing to pounce. The red flashes in his eyes were imprinted in her memory forever. The whole world narrowed down to just one horror, frozen in her gaze. But suddenly, a piercing ringing of a bell cuts through the tension. The old judge, who was watching the duel, announces its end. Her steps, initially hesitant, gain firmness. She leaves the battlefield, having accepted defeat. He bows his head in a sign of independence, and she looks at him in a completely new way. In her eyes, one can read not just surprise, but deep understanding. Now they are in the gazebo. She is sitting, wrapped in a blanket, and he is standing nearby, keeping his distance. You are a magnificent mage, she said, finally acknowledging his true power, and he only humbly replied that the incredible reaction was her gift. Watching his skill at flattery, she subtly noticed that he had clearly managed to get used to this world. And although she had heard rumors about his simple origins, she could not be deceived. The ancient skills required titanic labor. The young man looks away, his words imbued with the harsh truth of a mercenary. Survival is his inner goal. She merely brushes off his modesty, admitting that she appreciates hard work, but her gaze moves further. The old magic teacher standing behind him is unlikely to approve of him, and it is better not to disturb his patience. I've learned a lot, she thinks, as she looks forward to the upcoming showdown at the Rose Salon. He reassures her that with such skills she has nothing to worry about. But she smiles mysteriously, slightly, as she sips her tea, because she is not interested in small victories. Her true adversary is someone else, whose name hangs in the air like a magic formula. Aiseline Eleanor Duplin, the name makes her think. He waits silently, capturing every contrast of his emotions. Suddenly, she seems to come to her senses, apologizing for her chatter and letting him go. The young man turns and leaves, leaving behind some inexplicable aftertaste. Her gaze falls on the cup, but her thoughts hover around Derek, a mercenary from the Beldun squad. It seemed like she had heard that name somewhere before. Memories paint before her the image of Iselin, who once uttered his name. Shock hits her as the truth hits her with cold clarity. Meanwhile, he was already running, crossing the yard abruptly, as if driven by an invisible force. Suddenly, someone's hand grabs his shoulder, stopping his run. It is she, in her scarlet cloak, who stands before him, looking at his unexpected determination. He is stunned. Who is this woman who so unceremoniously interrupts his path? His usually imperturbable demeanor betrays a hint of confusion and caution as he looks at her face. But without wasting a second, she says words of complete confidence. "It's you, right? The same mercenary who trained Deal," she continued, now realizing that his secret identity had been revealed. The scene changes and we are transported to the refined interiors of the mansion, where the last rays of sun penetrate through the window. The soft crackling of the fire in the fireplace creates a cozy atmosphere, but the growing tension foreshadows a serious conversation. "I'll get straight to the point," she declares bluntly, sitting across from him. "If I defeat Aislinn, I'll do anything." He looks up at her, his red eyes filled with surprise. "You want to defeat Lady Aislinn?" "Yes," she affirms, looking at her face filled with fiery determination. "He still hasn't become a 2-star mage, and I'd like to reach that first. But if that doesn't work out, I want to at least defeat her in a magical duel." He reflected on her words and remarked, "You have an incredibly strong competitive spirit." "Competitive spirit? How beautifully you put it," she says, her gaze drifting off into the past. "Of course, now you could call it competitiveness. Before, I wanted to beat Celine so badly that I wouldn't even hesitate to resort to baseness." Her voice quiets as she continues. "Jealousy is dirty and pathetic. I was jealous of Iselin. And it didn't lead to anything good," she admits bitterly, recalling her actions. "No matter how much I gossiped behind her back and tried to find fault with her, Aislinn only tried to understand and accept me." He pauses, considering her unexpected revelation, and then asks, "Why are you telling me this?" "And I have something I want to ask," she replies, looking straight at him. He nods, his face regains its readiness, and hears, "Please ask." She pauses briefly, composing herself with the liquid. "Since you lived in the Duplain house, it must be wonderful to know how strong Aislinn is." Her gaze pierces him, waiting for confirmation. "And what I'm capable of," she concludes, challenging his understanding of her true ambitions. She froze, absorbed in a whirlpool of thoughts, and moved forward into this labyrinth of fate. After all, the main question that torments her soul remains unchanged: how to surpass the one who seemed invincible. The young man, on the contrary, also seemed to be immersed in his thoughts, carefully weighing every word. He acknowledges the undeniable fact that Lady Iselin has achieved astonishing heights in her art, but immediately add that it also contains remarkable potential that can blossom through hard work. However, he understands that her questions are not dictated by greedy compliments or simple approval. In her eyes, he sees true despair, so deep that she is ready to seek help even from an insignificant mercenary like him. The quiet crackling of the fire in the fireplace only emphasizes the tension hanging between them. And then he says something that breaks the silence. "You can't defeat her," he stated bluntly, crushing her hope. Her gaze freezes, and a storm of protest rises in her soul against such a categorical verdict. He does not take his piercing gaze away, as if trying to convey the full significance of his words seriously. But she can't come to terms with this. She doesn't want to. "I thirst with all my soul. Even if it's impossible, I will win," bursts from her chest, filled with an unbending will. His eyes widen with such ardent determination, and he falls silent, digesting what he has heard. Then she changes tactics, reminiscent of his past success. "You turned the worthless Diesel into a magician." And he concludes with a challenge. "So you can make it so that I too can defeat Iselin, right?" There's a moment of tense silence as he searches for the right words. Finally, he admits that there are still ways worth trying, and hope is not yet extinguished. However, before he gets down to business, he needs to clarify a few things, and she, with a grin, impatiently awaits his conditions. He begins to explain his terms, his gaze penetrating and serious. His decision evokes shadows of the past, images of the cruelty and despair that made him who he is. He remembers his own transformation, the moment when innocence gave way to cold determination. The power that he walked with became his only companion in a world where the weak are not spared. He sees the face of fear reflected in the eyes of those who stood in his way and understands the price of being forced to die for survival. She interrupted him, promising full dedication, assuring him that she was ready to do anything to win, even if she didn't know all the details of his demands. He then goes on to recall his status as a mercenary, implying the inevitable consequences of such cooperation. She anticipates his fears with a grin, suggesting that he is afraid for his reputation, for the rumors that could support him as a teacher. But her laughter quickly changes when she declares her ambitions, her desire for her name to become a legend throughout the empire. He continues, explaining that even first place in the tournament is just a step towards her true listeners, otherwise it's all meaningless. Her anger burns in her eyes as she rejects any suggestions of her sincerity, calling his concerns insignificant. She comes to her readiness to cast aside pride, realizing that there are goals far more significant than empty conventions. He looked at her carefully, assessing the suddenly revealed essence of her character. It revealed her motives. But his next sentence brings her back down to earth, bringing her back to the implementation of their deal. She freezes, struck by such an unexpected but quite logical turn of events. Confusion and realization wash over her as the true meaning of his words dawns on her. Giggling awkwardly, she admits her mistake, hastily promising any situation. He looks away, feeling growing awkward, or perhaps her naivety is causing him to feel an inexplicable heat. However, despite this comical situation, his decision remains unshakable. She showed her determination, and he responded in kind, without any concessions. Under a serene sky where time seems to stand still, these two are ready to begin their journey, facing all the challenges. The air is thick with anticipation. Rumor has it that a magical duel will take place at the upcoming gathering. Lady Elente, her heart pounding in anticipation of the fight, knew that time was running out. Her interlocutor, noting Aiselin's inherent modesty, hardly suspected the determination hidden beneath it. And then, like a bright flash, Lady Elente herself appears, illuminating the space with her confident presence. The exchange of pleasantries quickly turns to light teasing, revealing the dynamics of their long-standing rivalry. Meanwhile, other ladies, sensing the growing tension, try not to interfere in this dangerous game of glances. Elente, with a sly smile, reminds Aiselin of her impeccable reputation as the invincible Flower of Duplin. Aiselin thanks him for the compliment, but then subtly hints that she won't let complacency lower her guard. With an unexpected revelation, Aiselin announces a new mentor, a commoner, whose skills she values above all prejudice. Elente narrows her eyes thoughtfully, and an anticipatory smile plays on her lips, as if she has solved the mystery. She leans closer, and an unkind light flashes in her eyes. The moment of truth is near. And the name that comes out of her mouth like a bolt from the blue shakes Aiselin to the depths of her soul. Derek. Elente's malicious laughter echoes through the garden. She enjoys her rival's confusion, feeling triumphant. Aiselin can only watch silently, her world seeming to crumble before her eyes. But her shock quickly gives way to a surprising composure. She extends her hand, congratulating Elente on acquiring such a reliable teacher. And in this sincere smile there is not a drop of pretense, only the purity of his virtues. Elente is stunned. Her carefully constructed triumph will be shattered by the onslaught of such unexpected nobility. Confused, she tries to find a response, but words are needed somewhere between bewilderment and a new round of intrigue. Meanwhile, in another corner, Dizela, whose progress in magic had slowed down, also thought about the same mentor. Her friend Layla, panicked, furiously dissuades her, not wanting anyone else to have anything to do with Derek. Dizela thoughtfully goes through the options, and her gaze stops on the image of Aiselin. And Leela, completely hidden from triumph, kindles the smoldering coals of envy in her, hinting at her achievements. Dizela struggles to suppress her anxiety as she tries to grasp the true scale of Layla's international reach. She tries to succeed, but Elente only smiles, not thinking about the warnings. A carefree Elente announces her upcoming first training session, completely unaware of the trap. She leaves Dizela with a light heart and only watches her with complete anxiety. The girl can calm herself down, convince herself that Derek is not causing harm, but perhaps he is gnawing at her from the inside. But a new shadow is already looming on the horizon. A mysterious stranger is watching what is happening from the shadows of the garden. Her gaze penetrates the illusions, and she quietly notes the efforts of all participants in this intricate game. Meanwhile, in the Belden's Tier Tavern, where merchants and mercenaries meet, another conversation is being discussed. A young mage, Derek, speaks with the innkeeper, revealing his growing ties to House Belmiard. He is pleased that he can carry out their assignment without leaving Abelstein, saving time and effort. The innkeeper notes skeptically that words are wasted because of this, especially when it comes to defeating Lady Aiselin. Derek, with a fire of determination in his eyes, declares that it is impossible. It is just a matter of connection. The innkeeper thinks that if Elente reaches the second rank, Aiselin's talent will be powerless against her superior strength. Tired of empty talk, he demands a concrete, real plan from Derek. And it is precisely this real way that requires extraordinary measures. The innkeeper looks at the magician with confusion, waiting for him to continue. Derek's gaze becomes a premise. Red eyes reveal hidden power and some ancient document. The innkeeper, sighing heavily, continues his work, feeling that a premonition of coming changes is in the atmosphere. The innkeeper finally loses his temper and turns to Derek with interest about his character and unrealistic plans. But Derek's gaze only hardens as he calmly states that reality itself is already full of dangers. At this moment, the swindler, crying, picks up his words, shouting that these scoundrels deceived her. Her trials mount, she has been trapped, tricked, and now she is in despair. The innkeeper, tired of the drama, suggests that Derek just take her with him to get it over with. The camera rises, covering the sunlit sky above the tavern, leaving behind the bustle and arguments. There is a slight breath of wind in the air, carrying away the cold sound and heralding a new beginning. We are transported to the last mansion, surrounded by greenery and luxury, a new sea action. The red-haired hostess, crossing her arms, confidently declares that their first lesson will be devoted to duels. She outlines her plan, first 10 repetitions of basic techniques, and then moving on to more complex magical duels. Derek, already preparing, clarifies whether he will conduct these 10 duels in a row without a break. The hostess, with a slight smirk, replies that she will first test his true skills in the first fight. She notes his rudeness but is not surprised, because he is a mercenary accustomed to harsh conditions. With cold pragmatism, she added that she had hired him not for history or etiquette lessons, but for specific purposes. Derek, accepting the challenge, immediately gets to work, and a bright blue flame flares up in his palm. A powerful impact shakes the training ground, raising clouds of dust and leaving obstacles in its wake. Mistress, breathing heavily, refreshing all my strength. Derek, her face covered in sweat. Derek, completely unperturbed, thanks her for her work and offers only a 10-minute break to review basic technologies. She is shocked by such a short pause, because many have almost no remaining body. But Derek is adamant. If you try hard enough, the mana will be found, he stated categorically, demanding to continue. Derek mercilessly demands that he create 100 arrows, despite her pleas of complete exhaustion. Exhausted, she collapsed to the ground, each breath a struggle. Only then did he allow her to finish, receiving a modest reward, dinner. But his next question, full of feigned concern, was like the lash of a whip. The mere thought of giving up makes Ellen flare up. Give up over such nonsense? She laughs, dismissing the serious training. She claims that his torture is nothing compared to the hell she had to endure to survive in high society. Derek listens thoughtfully, admitting that he underestimated her past experience. Standing up, Ellen, despite her still trembling legs, promises that she will show her best side tomorrow. And it is even necessary to increase the load, claiming that today was just a warm-up. Derek raises an eyebrow, his gaze becoming transparent. Tomorrow? He asks again, and the coldness in his voice makes Ellen tense. With a devilish glint in his eyes, he reminds us that today is not over yet, and evening classes are just beginning. The ominous evening sky silently confirmed his words. And while the darkness thickens outside the window, somewhere in the distance, new chapters and adventures flicker. The next morning greets Lady Alente with a new challenge, and Derek does not give her a second's respite. With the last of her strength, gritting her teeth, she pulls the rest of the magic out of herself, but Derek urges her on again. You still have a lot of mana in you, he says in shock, speaking of her new, even more insane demand. Then he suddenly breaks into a run, and her startled body barely keeps up with him, clinging to the last of her strength. Her body seemed to be no longer cooperating with her. Every breath was painful, and her mana was depleted to the last drop. Are you okay? He asks emotionlessly, and she, choking on her words, tries to convince both him and herself that everything is fine. In response, he only offers to surrender, his gaze piercing and cold like the winter wind. But Denise only smiles wryly, denying the very thought of what happened, calling this torture just a warm-up. He watches her for a long time, despite the strength of her true thoughts and seeing real strength behind the mask of resilience. And then, just as she sat down to catch her breath, he announced a sparring match, leaving her shocked. 2 weeks passed, filled with non-stop training, each day of which became a test of endurance. Denise spat right on the table, and her friend, Lady Denise, who was calmly reading a book, agreed to wake her up for Iceland's arrival. In her sleep, Denise thanks her, admitting that the last few days have been completely consumed by grueling magical training. Then Lady Denise, putting down her book, asked what made her torment herself so mercilessly. Denise falls into a short silence, as if gathering herself to find an answer, and deep within that driving force. Her eyes open, full of determination, to win. Because I want to win, her voice sounds firm. There is so much unwavering will in her words that Lady Denise looks at her friend with undisguised amazement. With a slight smile, she closes the book and promises to help Denise in her quest for victory. Her gaze turns again to her friend, now filled not only with surprise, but also with deep thoughtfulness. At this moment, other ladies look at them, their steps disturbing the morning silence and serenity of the garden. "Lady Aislinn has arrived," one of them says, and Denise instantly jumps up as if she had not been sleeping. Lady Aislinn herself appears before them, graceful, with dark hair and blue eyes full of hidden strength. Denise covers her face with her hand, her emotions fluctuating between embarrassment and annoyance at her own condition. Aislinn invites her to visit a new clothing store, and Denise, forgetting her awkwardness, happily agrees. Her gaze falls on Aislinn, asking about something that just happened, about someone leaving. A calm response from her friend confirmed the mysterious stranger had disappeared, leaving only a slight trace of confusion. Denise breathes a sigh of relief, fearing what she saw in such a casual manner, but Aislinn confidently dispels her fears. At the same time, somewhere in the distance, another lady with deep blue eyes catches snippets of someone else's conversation, her face darkening. Lady Alente, her eyes flickering with a strange light, worries about Denise's fate, feeling some hidden pain. As dusk falls, the gloomy mansion becomes shrouded in shadow, keeping its secrets under the cover of the evening. Denise, tired, sits obediently in front of the mirror, while the maid announces an unexpected gift from the Duplain house. The box opens, revealing mysterious bottles of elixirs and delicate flowers, a message full of hidden meaning. It turns out it was from Aislinn herself, who carefully collected the best mana-restoring remedies to support her friend. The maid respects the quality of the gifts, but Denise's response, suddenly and with cold determination, orders them to be thrown out. Her voice sounds unyielding, not allowing for objections, and the astonished maid, obeying, promises to carry out the order. Changing the subject, Denise turns to Derek and learns that he is already prepared for their morning session, waiting for her instructions. Meanwhile, the old letter reveals my lines, telling about the visible winter and the promise of the first snow. Through fiery flourishes, the author inquires about the well-being of the addressee in anticipation of cold days. Denise's look, full of inner struggle and integrity, marks her difficult fate. Somewhere, other young ladies, surrounded by similar boxes, are whispering happily, their faces glowing with anticipation. Denise's lips press together, her thoughts going deep, foreshadowing new challenges and decisions. The sky darkens, gathering heavy clouds, as if foreshadowing coming changes and storms. In the privacy of the courtyard, young Derek, immersed in his reading, quietly awaits his hour, his presence enveloping but not intrusive. His red eyes, sharp and piercing, betray something more than mere anticipation, a deep complexity or premonition. Suddenly, Lady Alente's silence fell. This appearance was unexpectedly early, but the urgency in her eyes overruled all formalities. She, without beating around the bush, demands his assessment, his insightful view of the state of affairs, taking him by surprise. After weeks of hard training, she seeks her harsh truth, wanting to know how he views her efforts. There's a heavy pause, only adding to the tension, as Derek gathers his thoughts. But his answer remains coolly pragmatic. Sometimes, he says, retreat is not a loss, but just a different strategy. These words hit her like an icy shower, leaving her frozen in bewilderment. The pain of his words echoes in her voice. She does not understand the reasons for such cruelty. In a calm tone, he apologizes if his directness was taken as an insult. But her anger at the demand, the question of attack, seems blasphemous to her, because how can one overcome Aislinn, the unshakable peak? Her voice screams, accusing him of betrayal, because she didn't hire him to hear about the latter. Derek just turns away, his back like an impenetrable wall, refusing to accept her pain. She issues an ultimatum, desperately demanding resolve, or her time will be wasted. And again, his voice pierces, calmly asking the question she dreads asking society: what if victory is unattainable? He argues that obsession only fetters, a violation of the true position. Defeat, he says, is sometimes worth accepting, but for her it means only a pitiful shadow. His red eyes are fixed on her, but the expression in them remains unreadable. Then, in a fit of despair, she tears off her masks, confessing her own little things, her shameful gossip. With every word, she sank deeper into self-flagellation, calling herself an envious bitch, which only serves to increase her pain. This cry is revolution, absolute and irrevocable, capitulation to one's own truth. All her failure and insignificance, all her pain spills out unexpectedly, exposing her soul to an indifferent sky. Her pregnancy is a flood of tears, a naked confession of her deepest pain. A sob cut off her words as she admitted that there was no reason to hate Aislinn, and he seemed to have known that for a long time. Her amber eyes, full of tears, reflect all the sadness of the long-hidden truth. But now it was time for her to ask her questions, piercing sounds like arrows. What keeps her fighting? What drove her in this never-ending race? It was not ordinary envy or competitive spirit as it seemed at first. Her true demons ran much deeper than anyone could have imagined. She hated not her rival, but her only reflection. This struggle was a cry of despair, a way to silence the inner voice that was suffering from inadequacy. And here, in connection with this emotional storm, a firm, decisive voice is heard. He is ready to do anything to help her achieve victory, a true victory over herself. Under this endless sky, a new promise is born, changing the course of their being. While some fought among the demons, others made their way into the unknown. The creaking of wheels and the clatter of hooves rhythmically follow the rhythm of a new journey. The long journey was drawing to a close, foreshadowing a quick stop. Finally, the carriage stops and the old man slowly approaches. His gaze, tired from the road, surveys the surroundings with undisguised interest. Before this, the Belmiard estate, the place where fate had led him, finally spread out. A new face greeted him, calling him by name as if he were a long-awaited guest. Politeness and ritual mask allow you to use the secrets you impart to this wanderer. With a slight smile that hides everything, the new acquaintance invites them to sit down, acknowledging the guest's long journey. Before us is Count Belmiard, Tristan Anelt Belmiard, a man whose name carries weight and status. The conversation quickly turns to a certain Elenta, the Count's prized possession, whose well-being and progress in magic clearly concerns him. Pride in her talent permeates every word of the Count. Old man Velmir only confirms that the girl has surpassed even him. But behind the mask of politeness, the old man hides deep anxiety because her true teachers must remain a secret. Suddenly, the Count changes the subject, talking about his upcoming affairs in Ebelstein, which causes obvious bewilderment in Belmir. With a devilish glint in his eyes, he offers to personally surprise Elenta. Behind this innocent appearance lies something more than just a visit. Old man Velmir forces out an uncertain agreement. His smile seems forced. Anxiety is brewing inside him. What will this surprise bring, and will everything be all right? A dark night arises on the rocky expanses, illuminated only by the pale light of the full moons. On the outskirts of Ebelstein, amid the fog, rises the entrance to the nameless labyrinth, a place shrouded in mystery. However, not everyone is ready to accept this path. Some people hesitate before entering, filled with doubts. The question hangs in the air. Is it worth bringing Lady Elente to this dangerous place at all? But hope rests with Derek, whose confidence suggests a well-thought-out plan. Elente herself is shocked by this turn of events, and her companion hastily assures that this is only a low-ranking labyrinth. But in her eyes one can read distrust. What will she do inside? And, finally, frivolously, just like that, rush into the unknown. Her companion needs to activate the engine first, promising his support. However, Elente cannot take his words seriously because there is only a little time left before the decisive training session. And in this tense moment, another figure is supported. When time is running out, radical measures are the only way out. And so, with his last hope, Derek makes a decision that changes everything, but his companions are full of doubts. Elente, however, full of light, cannot be shocked by what is happening. Her gaze is full of unspoken questions. Every second drags on until their footsteps echo in the cold, gloomy corridor. They reach ever further, into unknown depths where every corner holds potential power. The freezing air and eerie fumes envelop them, causing Elenta to swell with disgust and fear. Derek, while maintaining a cool head, remains cautious, for even in safe zones, danger awaits those who promote vigilance. His red eyes scan the darkness as Elente watches uneasily, feeling the tension in the demand. Suddenly, a sharp glance at their archer pierces the darkness, Pelin catching movement where there shouldn't be any. Her voice cut through the silence, signaling the approach of the goblins, and Derek could already hear their vile giggles. But the threat to the achievement is not only from outside. Heavy stomping is heard from behind, and the approach of the ogre makes Elente freeze in horror. Verbally tempting fate, the older companion asks Derek with a smirk if he is ready to fight the giant, and in response, with icy calm, the experienced mercenary hints that his valor has its price. Derek, his body beginning to glow with a mysterious menace, pushes questions aside, focusing only on the battle ahead. Vile screams and giggles are heard from all sides, and many red lights flash in the darkness. Elente realizes that these are not just creatures, but real monsters, and she is called an all-consuming fear. One of the goblins, his teeth bared, rushes forward, brandishing a primitive but deadly spear. But Derek, displaying incredible reflexes, dodges the blow, sliding like a shadow. Having barely avoided one attack, he immediately found himself face to face with another, equally ferocious opponent. Horror grips Elente when she sees monsters close by. Without hesitation, Derek motions for Pelin to cover him, and the archer instantly draws her bowstring, preparing to release the arrow. Derek doesn't hesitate, his blade flashing brightly, filling the air with anticipation of battle. A crushing blow falls on the nearest goblin. Meanwhile, Pelin releases his arrow, aiming with cold blood. One of the arrows hits the monster, piercing its flesh. But it's not enough, and Derek raises his sword again. He delivers another lightning strike, cutting through the enemy. In a whirlwind of fear, he moves with inhuman speed. His blade begins to glow with an ominous crimson light, foreshadowing something terrible. Suddenly, flames burst from his hands and he unleashes all his power. Pelin, without wasting a second, continues to shower his enemies with deadly arrows. Derek cuts his way to the crowd, his sword dancing a deadly dance. Another goblin falls, taken down by a fine shot. Elente watches their brutal grip, her heart pounding. The monster's growl comes from right behind her, and horror paralyzes her. A giant goblin with flaming eyes looms over her, ready to strike. Derek turns around, noticing Elente looming over him by accident. Memories of someone's dismissive question about his values flicker through Dur's search engine. But now is not the time for doubt, only steel and determination. An evil roar notices him when a monster attacks. A sudden blow from a club shakes the air, but the hero uses the moment to strike back. The blade's swift thrust finds its target, and then the monster, bursting into flames, lets out a death cry. In the blink of an eye, pierced by a dozen diseases, he falls dead. The girl who witnessed this asks in horror, "What is this?" Realization hits her. They really try to kill me. Fear pierces her to the very depths, pondering in her long pupils. The heart pounds in the chest, foreshadowing imminent death. At that moment, the boy, overcome with pain, screams, "A monster is heading your way. Please pull yourself together." The girl screams. A new horror makes her shudder. The monster rushes forward, and the distance between predator and prey melts. Lying on the ground, she thinks, "I'm going to die now. I'm going to die now." The last moments before the impact stretch into infinity. But someone's voice, full of determination, breaks through the veil of horror. "You must kill him." And then, in her case, the image of who she had been until now flashes. The look changes. There is no longer the same fear in it, only the shadow of a deep thought. Tears flow down her cheeks, but they contain not only grief, but also the problems of struggle. Meanwhile, the monster had almost reached its target, raising its club for the final blow. She clutches something incredible in her hand, as if trying to cling to the last memory. And at that moment, against all odds, she rises, ready to surrender her fate. Her gaze pierces you, and a sinister grin plays on her lips. Instantly, the evil grin turns to horror, the awareness of uncontrollable power. And yet, in desperation, she used the ancient power, turning it against the enemy. A spear of pure energy is born in her hands, ready to pierce any obstacle. An evil goblin lies on her, his eyes gleaming predatorily in the semi-darkness. Nearby, a young warrior, scarred by battle, watches the fight. The spear strike is precise and deadly. The monster is defeated, the murderous blood in oblivion. But the price of the great victory, the heroine is thrown back, falling into an abyss of blinding light. The observer, with a stern look, only shakes his head, realizing the gravity of his situation. The young archer, like a ghostly shadow, silently prepares her arrow. Another battle, and the red-haired warrior turned into her daring fury. But even the strongest can stumble, and pain pierces her ally. Anger distorts her, but her eyes burn with only one desire, to take revenge on her face. Their gazes meet through the smoke, and an invisible connection is formed between them. His scarlet eyes reflect not only determination, but also a deep, unspoken sadness. "No," she whispers, refusing to accept any weakness or defeat. Through pain and promise, she finally takes the decisive step towards her destiny. Moonlight illuminates the ancient gates that hold the secrets of bygone eras. "It's been more than 2 years since he named Ebelstein," he reads in the faded letter. Words about simplicity and new life, about magic and teaching a young lady, echo in his memory. In the faded pages, he learns of the insatiable thirst for knowledge of your lady, who now teaches his mentor. The words change, bringing him back and then turning to their own journey, to the days spent wandering around Ebelstein. A slight smile touches his lips as he remembers the freedom and joy that accompany them despite the difficulties. The letter continues, praising him as the most talented of all the mages she had ever encountered. A quiet pride, mixed with slight sadness, flashes in his scarlet eyes. The question hangs in the air like a challenge, confirming her high expectations. She looks forward to their next meeting, eager to see the fruits of his growth and skill. The letter ends with the signature of the woman who once guided him through the first steps of magic. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the letter writer, Katie, was lost in thought, contemplating the passage of time. And here, by the flickering light of the torch, he rereads the letter, the words that connect him to the past. A new figure disturbs his solitude. His companion notices his constant preoccupation with worn paper. He responds calmly, naming the sender, and there is a note of support for independence in his voice. Seraphina's eyes light up in a playful grin, her words a gentle jab at his serious nature. His expression remains unchanged, not giving in to her jokes, and yet a barely noticeable smile plays on his lips, confirming her words. Seraphina, taken aback by his sincerity, falls silent for a moment. She confessed her desire to tease him, but he, in his usual manner, did not understand at all. The upcoming fight is alive in the atmosphere, and he talks about her well-being. Her brows furrow, her face reflecting doubt and determination. But then a fierce determination flashes in her eyes, an unwavering promise of victory. Against the backdrop of the azure sky, a slight hum of anticipation can already be heard. Here it is, the arena for magical duels in the aristocratic quarter, already full of impatient hubbub. Iselin radiates charm, cheerfully forms words with her friends, her smile shines. But for a moment, a slight surprise flashes in her eyes. Her bright pupils dilate slightly. Looking down, a white-haired young man named Derek walks past, lost in his thoughts. With a graceful bow, Iselin offers a polite apology, her gesture full of good manners. But her beaming smile returns when she calls his name, breaking out of her reverie. Her joy at meeting him is palpable, but his response sounds strange, merely a formal greeting to a young lady. A wicked smile plays on her lips when she overhears rumors of his help to the young lady Alenta with her magic. He confirms his work, his gaze still avoiding hers, the harsh changes. A thick silence hangs between them, filled with unspoken words and hidden tension. With a soft, almost teasing smile, she noted his constancy, subtly inquiring about his methods with Elente. Derek's piercing gaze met hers, a silent challenge in his eyes as he remembered the rumors of his unusual methods and Elente's growing weariness. Her question, tinged with feigned concern for her rival, is met with a sharp, tenacious reproach for her own self-confidence. Derek's crimson eyes narrow, an unyielding determination hardening his features. Caught off guard, Aiselin looks up, her composure wavering, a bead of sweat betraying her sudden agitation. In a whisper, the two observers discuss the outcome, confident of Aiselin's victory unless Elente does something extraordinary. Away from the gossip, Elente sits alone, frail and haggard, her gaze glued to the pages of her books, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. The light sound of footsteps ascends the grand staircase, merging with the growing roar of the crowd. Aiselin glides forward, her graceful stride seemingly carefree, but a subtle shift in her delivery betrays echoes of Darika's words. On the border between height and hope, she takes a deep breath, trying to calm her beating heart. Meanwhile, the heavy sound of other steps measures the determination of the advancing shadow. "I will win, I will win," Elente whispers, as if casting a spell, and the oath echoes with steel in her voice. Every step, every closet is filled with only one all-consuming thought of victory. She rises, leaving behind her thoughts and weaknesses, striving for the top. A fire burns in her eyes, reflecting a ruthless revolution and a steely determination that does not tolerate defeat. Derek watches her, seeing a reflection of his own ambition and cold calculation. The last steps separate her from the decisive moment. And here they stand opposite each other in a sunlit arena, the personification of two worlds. Aiselin, as always, exudes calm, addressing her rival with her usual politeness. Elente responds to her with kindness, but behind the polite words lies a reliability as sharp as a blade. But Aiselin breaks this game. "I've never been so worried." Her words sound like a confession, revealing the true essence of her experiences. Elente just grins, her challenge filling the air. "Shall we begin?" Aiselin's gaze hardens, the last sentences dissipating, giving way to pure determination. The aura around Elente flares like an ancient flame, her eyes burning with a predatory fire. A clot of furious energy emerges from her palm. In response, Aiselin surrounds herself with a blue glow, cold and piercing like winter. Her hand, like a conductor, delivered the power of ice, ready to crush everything in its path. And here they are, two opposing elements, converging in a dance of strength and destruction, on the eve of inevitable victory. The element of fire rises in response, foreshadowing a fierce storm. She doesn't hesitate, furiously unleashing her own barrage of fire on the enemy. And below, amidst the chaos, a young lady, a witness to this deadly dance, stood frozen in horror. Hundreds of fiery arrows, like living clasps, soar into the sky to fall upon her opponent. This is not just an attack, it is a flaming rain, capable of consuming and incinerating everything in its path. There is a defiant rage burning in her eyes. She is ready to go to the end, no matter what the cost. But this duel is only an echo of days long gone, or a harbinger of future, even more severe trials. After all, once she herself seemed to stand on the brink of despair, looking for a way to victory where there was none. And then they whispered to her a simple but powerful word: will. It was a grueling workout where every day was a test of endurance. He explained that the true battle begins when the magic fades and only pure will remains. True victory is the complete exhaustion of the enemy, the draining of his last strength. It was only necessary to wait for the moment when the enemy made a fatal mistake. But what if Aiselin, her formidable opponent, had an inexhaustible source of mana? The answer was simple and cruel: then only difficulty awaits. After all, mana reserves are a gift, or a curse, received at sunset, and it is largely predetermined. This gift cannot be changed, only its boundaries can be accepted. But she is not one to resign herself to fate, to accept the boundaries set by someone else. And now, again in the present time, she approaches with all her power, bringing down a hail of fire. Little Elente looks up, realizing the true, terrifying power of her formidable opponent. Red raises her hand again, calling down more flaming arrows from the sky. Her gaze burns with merciless determination, and a shining spear materializes in her hand. Thousands of fiery circles rush down, ready to incinerate everything in their path. Majestic and terrifying, she stands at the center of a firestorm, commanding the elements. Elente doesn't panic, only keeping a close eye on the deadly rain. She raises her hands, and a powerful blue aura begins to gather around her. The air hummed with her power as she called for her own spell. An impenetrable shield unfolds around her, reflecting every fire arrow. In her azure eyes, one can see steel, the unshakable lattice of a canopy. The rival seems surprised by such a rebuff, but her anger only flares up brighter. Red suddenly throws her flaming arsenal into the battle, increasing the onslaught. Nothing stopped her on her way to victory, not even this unexpected defense. But Elente only maintains a defensive position, not allowing a single arrow to penetrate. Her calm is deceptive. Behind it lies a deep analysis of the situation. The clash of elements shakes, bolts of magic sparkle in the air. The observers are amazed. Elente's magic has gained incredible power. She stands unwavering, taking every blow in complete control. Elente sees weakness. The opponent is squandering her strength, using subtlety. A spark flashes in the depths of her azure eyes, foreshadowing a quick turn of events. And suddenly, like a predator, Elente makes her move, testing a gap in the enemy's defense. But before she could change her success, a competitor's voice said defiantly, "Now it's my turn." And then, out of nowhere, a barrage of magical attacks descends, seeking to crush Elente. A sharp, shining arrow pierces the air with incredible speed, aiming straight at the heart. The enemy, engulfed in radiance, moves like a ghostly shadow, unleashing a hail of deadly planets. One of them reaches its target, breaking apart against an invisible barrier. But is this the true target? Confusion flashes in Elente's eyes. She is shocked by the power and suddenly attacks, wondering, really? The opponent of the celebration realizes that she is using illusion magic, which requires colossal reserves of mana. She is confident of her victory, while Elente, as in the world, dissolves into the air behind her. Calm and insightful, Elente takes stock of the situation, her mind working at the lightning speed of a glance. Now she stands behind her competitor, whose attack came through an empty mind, only lingering in space for a moment. But we are consciously transported back to the origins of this insidious plan, when the strategic genius confidently declared, "This will work." First, blind with fire arrows, then confuse illusions, close the distance and strike with ice spears at point-blank range, he explains in detail. Even an experienced magician falls into this trap. But there is deep concern in his eyes, because your opponent is not just some experienced magician. Meanwhile, at the present time, the enemy, the insignificant insight of his strategy, turns out to be a fatal blow with an ice spear. Elente, watching, realizes that the ice spears are flying at such incredible speed and distance, extremely expectant. "I don't have time for a protective spell," she thought. In that case, an explosion of magical energy. Elente extends her hand, preparing to directly engage the attack. The opponent's face contorts with anticipation and fury as she charges forward. An ice spear with a crystal sheen rushes towards Elente, foreshadowing an imminent collision. but it failed to touch the target. It freezes in the air, engulfed in the glow of a powerful, pulsating sphere from Elente's hands. But only for a moment did she freeze, sprawled on the ground, while the spear hung in the air, her power holding it at bay. A sudden counterattack, famous and merciless, threw Elente high into the sky. Her opponent, the red-haired witch, stood above the epicenter of the powerful blow, furiously hatching a new plan. However, Elenta, having suddenly regained her composure, sank back to the ground, her gaze blazing with determination. A look of genuine surprise flashed in the redhead's eyes. She had never expected such rapid destruction. The girls both froze facing each other, and the heat of an unspoken struggle was already swirling between them. That was close, flashed through Elenta's mind, sweat beading on her forehead, but she didn't flinch. A cold voice sounded in the distance, as if giving her an admonition. Whoever your opponent, never let your guard down. Elente lowered her eyes, deeply absorbing the meaning of these words, which now took on a completely different sound. Her skill level, the way she uses magic, everything about her has changed, Elenta said, realizing the danger. The redhead, unaware of her rival's thoughts, only increased the pressure with her presence. The illuminating circles of energy swirled around Elente's feet again, representing her area, the crushing answer. Today I will also use brute force, Elente exclaimed mentally, her determination reaching its peak. And ice spears, rising from the ground, surrounded her, becoming a raised shield and a deadly weapon. In a direct clash, I will not lose. The sharp edges of the spears, like crystal blades, sparkled menacingly, ready to fall upon the enemy. With a roar, Elilente unleashed her icy arsenal, filling the sky with thousands of harsh facets. Mesmerized spectators watched as the battlefield transformed into an icy hell created without a complex spell. And Derek, hiding in the shadows, chuckled slightly, his gaze cold and calculating. She took the bait, flashed through his mind as Elente revealed her full power. The biggest redhead realized the full horror of her mistake, and her face expressed undisguised rage. Her powers came crashing down, piercing the sky like icy spears, and even her rival acknowledged this power. But the redhead only grinned, her plan hidden from view. The tension rose, mana gathering in her palm, preparing for a counterattack. In response to the barrage of ice spears, the sky lit up with a magical glow. Elente stood as if in the center of an ice storm, her gaze full of determination. Fire burned in her eyes, and a fiery arrow shot out from her palm, instantly rushing towards its target. But it wasn't just one arrow. Whole streams of flame curved into the air, bypassing the ice barrier. One of them, the fastest, rushed straight towards Elenta, passing all the obstacles. A gust of wind, a harbinger of trouble, blew her hair back, and a momentary look of confusion crossed Elente's face. Her blue eyes widened in shock, aware of the invisible attack. The fiery arrows whirled in a deadly dance, shattering the ice shards around them. Pain shot through her leg, and Elente staggered, barely able to stay on her feet. A fire arrow? When did she manage to do that? The silent question froze on her lips, as the girl hadn't sensed any complex spell. Looking up at the sky, Elente suddenly realized, was this really a delayed blow, hidden from the very beginning? A single arrow, hidden at a special moment, now became the culmination of a cunning plan. Another fire arrow pierced her legs, causing her to stagger back. The redhead stood motionless, her triumphant smile speaking for itself. I can't read her mind, flashed through Elente's mind, sensing the unpredictability of what was happening. Even outside observers were amazed. The two forces clashed in equal combat, demonstrating incredible skill. I'm superior to her, aren't I? A smug thought flashed through the redhead's mind, reveling in her apparent victory. The girl, who had held the initiative just a moment ago, suddenly felt, I can't win under these conditions. Heavy breathing interrupts the flow of my thoughts. Every cell of my body demands a break. Her lips pressed together, causing hidden pain and despair. But in her eyes, there was not only destruction, steel, and determination to turn the tide of the fight. And from the side, carefully watching every movement, the young man with scarlet eyes grinned. Now it all really begins, he whispered, anticipating the coming storm. At that very moment, a blinding light burst from the blue-haired girl's chest. She soared up, embraced by a powerful stream of azure energy that surrounded her like a whirlwind. The red-haired opponent froze, her complacency evaporating, replaced by confusion and anxiety. The power grew, turning into a pulsating cocoon from which waves of pure energy were released. A powerful push threw her back, causing her to lose respect. Wind? Where did it come from? And this doesn't look like magic at all. Shock and bewilderment filled her voice. And then it dawned on her, her eyes widening in sudden, horrifying realization. They were thrown into the abyss, where not a single particle of mana could be felt, due to their disappearance of power. The young man, standing at a distance, bowed his head slightly, pleased with how his plan was unfolding. The blue-haired girl also felt the effects, but her gaze was directed forward at her defeated opponent. But the red-haired girl, despite everything, extended her hand, and a fiery sun was born between her palms. The final spark, pure rage embodied in a fireball, pulsing with menace. She stood up to her full height, holding the blazing light above her, challenging the abyss itself. Her eyes burned with determination, promising that this fight was far from over. Her gaze showed an unwavering will, and in her raised hand a mature strength capable of breaking any chain. It was the second star fireball that burst out from her palms, promising to incinerate everything in its path. The observers can only stand still, watching as a distant figure unleashes the fiery breath of heaven upon the world. And while the flames die down, revealing the horizons of new trials, history awaits their continuation.